It's an average day at Site 43 of the SCP Foundation, and a new researcher has arrived for her first day at the site. She fills out an intimidating stack of onboarding paperwork, takes a picture for her new ID badge, and meets her direct supervisor. "There's something you should probably know about working at this site," he begins, but an alarm sounds down the hall, and he has to rush away to attend to it. "We'll finish this later, don't move," he calls to her before he disappears from sight. Then she's left alone, twiddling her thumbs, shifting from foot to foot, and looking at her new workplace. It looks like any other Foundation site for the most part. One unusual thing does catch her eye, though. There are mirrors everywhere, all along the walls of the hallway, seemingly all the way down until the hallway bends out of sight. What could those possibly be for? As she runs through the possibilities in her head, she hears the squeaking wheels of a mop cart coming toward her. A janitor is making his way across the floor, mopping at the tiles as he goes. He has a pair of headphones covering his ears, and she thinks about interrupting him to ask about the mirrors, but doesn't want to disturb him. Then, she spots something just behind the janitor, reflected in the mirror, that makes her scream and drop her clipboard. There is a face, ashen and ghastly, like some horrible phantom out of a scary story. She spins around, expecting to see the horrible face lurking behind her, but there's nothing there. Whatever the thing is, it's just in the mirror. When her supervisor returns, he finds her pale and sweating, her hands shaking. She stumbles over her words, trying to tell him what she just saw. He laughs at her wide-eyed expression and says, "Oh, don't worry, that's just Philip and his constant companion." Then, he tells her all about SCP-5056. SCP-5056 is a hairless humanoid entity with gray matte skin and 3 slash-like scars on its face, resembling the placement of eyes and a mouth. It does not have a physical, corporeal form, at least on the visual spectrum, and can only be seen in reflective surfaces. It appears to prefer manifesting in glass, especially mirrors and lenses. Any equipment or media that captures the entity's image will begin to degrade on an atomic level. Though anyone can see SCP-5056 when it appears in a reflective surface, only one person is able to hear it speak: Philip E. Deering, also referred to as SCP-5056-B. Philip Deering is a white man with brown eyes and brown hair, standing at 172 centimeters tall. He joined the staff of SCP Foundation Site 43 as a custodian in July of 1999, and for his first 3 years of service, there was nothing notable about him. He was a pleasant man, though occasionally prone to bouts of depression, and was a reliable employee. In September of 2002, however, his behavior changed following a disastrous incident involving anomalous materials in Achromatic Abatement Facility AAF-D. After this incident occurred, Philip began exhibiting signs of auditory hallucinations, reacting to sounds that no one else could hear. At first, this was thought to be the result of a mental health episode brought on by stress and trauma, but the discovery of SCP-5056 soon proved that the voice he was hearing was not, in fact, in his head. Since the first day it appeared to him, SCP-5056 has followed Philip everywhere he goes. It has not expressed interest in any other people or entities, except for situations where it felt that Philip was being threatened. It is aware of other entities, it simply does not care about them. As for its behavior toward Philip, SCP-5056 has historically behaved in a way opposite to Philip's emotional needs. When Philip is trying to sleep, it opens its mouth scar and screams. It picks verbal fights with him when he is overwhelmed or sad, including reminding him of estranged family members, awkward social interactions, and personal failings. He has gotten used to his companion over the years, even giving notes on its less than effective insults and encouraging creativity. He has even given the entity a nickname: Doug. SCP-5056 becomes enraged when separated from Philip, and if there is no available reflective surface upon which it can manifest and speak to him, it will begin to act out. After 9 seconds have passed without SCP-5056 having access to Philip, it will begin to vibrate at an intense speed and emit an endless 119 decibel sound that reverberates through the entirety of Site 43. As soon as Philip is returned to 5056's line of sight, both the sound and the vibrating will immediately stop. Staff in the area have been made aware of the entity's presence and its aggressive tendencies. Following an incident involving Dr. Bradbury, who experienced immense psychological distress after SCP-5056 appeared in one of the lenses of her eyeglasses that led to her eventual resignation, no one wearing glasses or any other reflective eyewear is permitted to interact with Philip or SCP-5056. Because SCP-5056 has no physical body, it cannot be truly contained in a traditional sense. However, its location seems to be bound to Phillips, and therefore limiting Phillips' movements to Site-43 has provided the Foundation with a workable solution. Aside from the issue with Dr. Bradbury, there has only been one other notable incident involving SCP-5056 so far. On January 23, 2003, Dr. Falkirk decided to perform an experiment that would prove Philip was not necessary for the containment of SCP-5056. Philip was sent to an observation room and instructed to turn on recording equipment. In the room, there was a steel table, a steel chair, and a hand mirror. After Philip sat down in the room, SCP-5056 warned him to get out. He ignored it and proceeded to talk with Dr. Falkirk. Falkirk gave an order to initiate Phase 2 of the experiment, and Philip began to have trouble breathing. After several seconds, he lost consciousness. Dr. Falkirk turned his and his assistant's attention to the mirror, where SCP-5056 was still present. It became enraged, yelling for Philip, and attacked Dr. Falkirk. Though the specific details of the attack are lost from official records, he was subsequently given medical treatment for blood loss, facial injuries, and the loss of his left eye. He has been under intensive psychological care ever since. Though no one but Philip is able to hear a word SCP-5056 says, any recording device that he activates will pick up the entity's voice. In order to give the research team a better sense of SCP-5056's behavior, Philip's uniform contains a microphone that is always on and always recording his conversations. It has, over the years, picked up everything that passes between Philip and the world around him, from his conversations with coworkers to the tiny torments and verbal barbs from SCP-5056. In 2020, however, the microphone recorded a series of events that would change Philip and his relationship to the anomaly in the mirror forever. Philip was struggling with a sense of crushing isolation, with the majority of his social interaction coming from Dr. Ngo and SCP-5056. The only bright spot in his days was the presence of Chief Amelia Tarosian of the Janitorial and Maintenance Section, who would often visit Philip to chat while he was mopping. They spoke regularly for months, joking with each other about work, Amelia asking questions about Philip's life with 5056, all while the entity needled Philip about his apparent crush on Amelia. On September 9, 2020, however, Amelia confessed something. She returned his feelings. The audio transcription from this day captured this revelation. "I never really thought... I didn't think you..." Philip began. "Really? Really?" Amelia retorted. "Yeah, really. Well, I mean, I didn't think you... either," she admitted. Philip laughed at this. "Are you kidding? You've got to be kidding. I mean, you're..." A moment of silence passed between the two, the air crackling with nervous excitement. "How long..." he began. She interrupted. "Since I met you." He laughed again, a giddy sound. "You had that on speed dial." "Well, how long..." she started. This time, he interrupted. "Since I met you." They both laughed for a long time before falling silent once again. "What are you thinking about?" Amelia asked. "Can't you tell?" She shook her head. "No? Confusing me with your anxiety surrogate?" "He hasn't said a word tonight." Philip smiled softly at this. "I must not have any anxieties right now." The two quickly developed a romantic relationship, Philip brushing off the doubts that SCP-5056 tried to plant in his mind. On June 11, 2021, Dr. Ngo conducted Philip's annual psychological review, and they discussed the notable changes in his demeanor and worldview. The audio from the session has been transcribed. "Thanks for letting me do this a day early," Philip began. "Well, hey, I have a social engagement tomorrow," Dr. Ngo replied. Philip laughed heartily at that. "You know, that might be the first time I've heard you laugh. Let's talk about that." SCP-5056 started to speak. "Yes, let's talk about..." But Philip cut it off. "About how humorless and morose I am?" The entity was stunned into silence. Dr. Ngo spoke up. "Was he about to say that? Are you finishing his thoughts now?" "Why not? They used to be my thoughts." "What changed?" SCP-5056 spoke up again. "Nothing." Philip disagreed. "A lot of things. Some of them because of Doug, some of them because of me, some of them..." "Chief Tarosian," Dr. Ngo finished the thought for him. "Yeah. I guess I didn't really care about improving myself until I had someone to improve for. Doug beat a lot of my flaws out of me. There just wasn't enough room in my head for self-pity or self-loathing or even selfishness with him nattering away in the background all day, every day. But Amy gave me something to actually work toward. This time, 5056 finished his thought. "You stopped wasting your life." "Go on," Dr. Nyo encouraged. It feels strange to say, because this has been a terrible year all over, but it still meant so much to me. Dr. Nyo nodded. You achieved something. I achieved something, and I reached out. My life isn't one long, indifferently narrated one-man show anymore. Sure, I'm still stuck underground, but I'm not alone down here anymore. SCP-5056 spoke up, giving one final thought. You are never alone, Philip. You will never, ever be alone. Never again. What's he saying? Something spooky? Dr. Nyo asked. Philip shook his head. It's phrased that way, but that's not how I'm taking it. The next morning, Philip prepared to take a life-changing step. He stood in front of a mirror, dressed in a tuxedo, and adjusted his bow tie. How do I look, Doug? He asked, because I can't see with you in the mirror. SCP-5056 replied, You're making a mistake. Philip laughed it off. Yeah, I've never been good at bow ties. I'd use a clip-on, but Amy would never forgive me, and anyway, it would clash with the tuxedo. SCP-5056 pushed further, refusing to let it go. You aren't ready for this. I definitely am. But hey, if you have objections, feel free to shout them out at the appropriate time. Nobody but me will hear you, but if you make good points, I'll be sure to pass them along. You won't hold up your end. I'd do anything for her. You don't have the energy. I've never felt this good. Are you even trying here, buddy? It won't change who you are. It already has. It won't fix you. Philip laughed, pulling his bow tie tight. He turned away from the mirror and toward the next chapter of his life with one final statement. I don't need to be fixed. As long as she had known him, Amelia Tarosian had demonstrated kindness, care, empathy, and curiosity toward Philip. Unlike her colleagues, she was not put off by the presence of SCP-5056, but approached it with an open mind and an appreciation for the entirety of Philip's self, the man beyond the anomaly. The two were married in Ipperwash Provincial Park on June 12, 2021, and have been together ever since. Notably, Amelia has reported that SCP-5056 remains largely dormant in her presence, allowing the two to spend their time together without interruption. Following Philip's relationship with Amelia and the improvement to his mental state, as well as changes to SCP-5056's behavior, the Foundation conducted a review and reassessment of the anomaly. Several high-ranking Foundation staff wrote down their changing thoughts on SCP-5056 and contributed them to the official revised file. Amelia R. Tarosian, chief of the janitorial and maintenance section and wife of Philip Deering, wrote, I don't think anyone understood Doug when he first manifested. They all thought he was an anomalous abuser, a demon with a short fuse, existing just to get a rise out of someone. They tell me Phil was plenty risible back then, introverted and absent-minded, the perfect jump scare target. But once he stopped being jumpy, Doug started needling him about his low self-esteem. Once he started standing up for himself, Doug made him worry about other people's needs. By the time I met him in 2019, Phil was considerate, unflappable, and still absolutely miserable. That's when Doug started bugging him about his love life. I don't think Doug is preying on Phil. I think he's trying to help. Dr. Harold R. Blank, chair of the Archives and Revision section, contributed, For the longest time, we thought Phil might be anomalous as well. We even tossed around the idea of classing him Thaumiel, which obviously didn't fly. At the very least, we were pretty sure Doug was an unconscious manifestation of his internal monologue, so we labeled it 5056-A and made him 5056-B. After nearly 2 decades of observation, however, I can say with near certainty that there is nothing at all remarkable about Philip Eugene Deering beyond his unusual equanimity in the face of enduring trauma. He is no longer considered an SCP object, and his paranormal paramour has been reclassified as simply SCP-5056. A self-containing, incorporeal emotional parasite requiring no containment because it voluntarily restricts itself to the presence of a man who voluntarily restricts himself to a secure underground bunker. We're still not sure what will happen when Phil dies, but my guess is 5056 gets one last class change to neutralized. Dr. Melissa Bradbury, chair of the Research and Experimentation section, included, No, I can't tell you what I saw, but I can tell you what I felt. That's only after more than a decade of Foundation psychotherapy, mind you. I was comatose for 11 months and endured 3 years of blurry vision because I couldn't put on a pair of specs or contact lenses without having a panic attack. When that thing filled up my vision, it felt like someone had gut-punched my brain. You know that late-night experience where you suddenly remember some stupid or embarrassing thing you did in your life and it makes you feel ashamed? Well, imagine if you suddenly thought of every stupid or embarrassing thing you'd ever done, all at once. Like your conscience finally got fed up and decided to go nuclear on you. No wonder Falkirk tore his eye out. Delfina M. Ibanez, chief of the Pursuit and Suppression section, had this to say. When Blank said we should let Deering keep playing janitor under his pet monster's watchful eye scars, I was skeptical. I was chief of security and containment, and that sounded like the polar opposite of both concepts. I'm happy to say I was wrong. Deering has absolutely nil combat utility, and without 5056, his disaster response priority would be somewhere just above the D class, and we don't even have D class at 43. But with 5056, he's practically an intruder deterrent system. You know what they say, a friend is someone who will help you move, a best friend is someone who will disintegrate your enemy's eyes. Dr. Noon T. Ngo, chair of the Psychology and Parapsychology section, wrote, SCP-5056 has co-opted JM64's negative thought processes, externalizing his melancholy and self-doubt. His earliest psych evaluation suggested a proclivity towards intrusive anxious thoughts. Because these thoughts are now literally intrusive, he can assess them much more rationally than he could without anomalous intervention. We still don't know what 5056 is, but I can say this much. It is devoted to its opposite number and wants to help him. It expresses affection in a grating, alien manner, but there's no arguing with the results. It's taken 19 years, but Deering has finally made peace with himself. Of course, he's had a little extra help in that regard. Finally, Dr. Polixeni Metaxas, chair of the Spectrometry and Spectrometry section, said, They've called this a haunting for 19 years. It's even entered the general terminology. A Deering-class haunting denotes the stalking of a corporeal being by an incorporeal one. Nobody really thinks of 5056 as a ghost, however. Nobody but me. The materials handling disaster which created Doug also annihilated at least 2 of our subjects in containment. The nature of those subjects is highly classified, but I can say this much. They are intimately connected to the cycles of guilt and apathy through which human society writ large regularly cycles. Is it too much of a stretch to suggest that one of them, or a fragment of one of them, was reconstituted in that thaumaturgical soup into Deering's inescapable conscience? If that's what happened, well, perhaps it still doesn't make him all that different from the rest of us. We're all haunted by something, and we're all haunting something ourselves. Our hopes and fears are just voices in our heads that only we can hear. Everything we are is just the hallucination of a hollow frame of meat and bone. So what separates us from the thing on the other side of the mirror? 3 dimensions and room to grow. Since the reassessment, the containment measures for SCP-5056 have been updated. It is now considered to be self-containing, with its position fixed to that of Philip. Philip is prohibited from leaving SCP Foundation facilities without direction from Security Clearance Level 4+ personnel, and must carry at least 1 reflective object on his person at all times. Any new or visiting staff must be briefed by Philip on the nature of SCP-5056. He is also required to undergo mental health treatment, mainly exposure response prevention therapy, which allows him to respond to his intrusive thoughts without acting on them. Though SCP-5056 once terrified Philip, bringing him endless distress, he has grown accustomed to its presence. Even when the things 5056 tells him are upsetting, he considers them to be necessary reflections of his inner life, providing him with introspection he has never been capable of on his own. Since Philip's marriage, the entity has grown more and more passive, appearing only to bring up areas that need improvement in the relationship, reminding Philip of ways he can be a better husband to Amelia. Just as Philip has become more comfortable with the presence of SCP-5056, so too has the rest of the Foundation staff. Perhaps, even if they're not entirely aware of it, they recognize something of themselves in that dynamic. Don't we all live with demons of our own, constant companions whispering our insecurities back to us, reminding us of the ways in which we fall short? They may not be as anomalous as SCP-5056, but their hold on us can be just as powerful, just as destructive. The only way to contain them is to look them in the face, learn to talk back, and decide against all odds to go after what we want anyway. We may never be truly rid of them, never be completely alone, and without that gray shadow lurking at our side. But that's okay. We can carry it with us, accepting that our fears, our hurts, our nagging anxieties are necessary parts of who we are. But we can also argue back against the voice that tells us we'll never be truly happy and say, yes, I will, because I deserve it. Eventually, we might just believe it enough for that voice to finally shut up. The old house has been abandoned for going on 2 decades, and as with any place that's been left uninhabited for this long, rumors tend to spiral. Of course, there are the more mundane explanations for why the 2-story, 4-bedroom home on the end of a nice street lays in semi-ruin. black mold, asbestos, rising house prices. But those weren't the stories that most people told. Everyone in the neighborhood knew what really happened. All those years ago, the family that lived there had been murdered, and their killer was never caught. The three young paranormal investigators, with EMF readers in their hands and GoPro cameras mounted on their hard hats, know all about this. They approach the house in the dead of night, mumbling commentary for the recordings. If the old house really is as haunted as everyone says it is, then they could be in for something really good here. Their subscribers always loved brand new paranormal content. They use a crowbar to breach the front door and head inside. It's everything you can expect from a house that had been abandoned for 17 years. Dust, cobwebs, and graffiti abound, broken bottles scattered across the floor. Someone has scrawled, "Welcome to Hell," above the door in faded Sharpie. It all plays perfectly for the cameras. Paranormal content gold. All of them turn on their flashlights, generously provided to them by one of their sponsors, of course. But in this particular situation, they have no idea just how valuable their product really is. After all, there are some frightening things that hide in the dark. The leader of the trio begins ascending the stairs, narrating into his helmet cam, giving the more popular version of the house's legend. The perfect suburban family, torn apart, literally, by a killer hiding in their home. The family had all been brutally murdered by someone in their home, but the police never found any sign of unlawful entrance or exit. There were no clues to the killer's presence whatsoever, in fact. It was as if they were a ghost, a vapor. It was almost as though whoever killed the family had always been in that house, and even after the murders were committed, they never left the place either. As he tells the story, the lead investigator starts to feel a little nervous. Even though he himself doesn't really believe in the supernatural, he just plays up reactions for the views, he still can't help but wonder, should I really be here? Am I making a terrible mistake? Is there a chance that whatever did this all those years ago could still be in the house, waiting for me? But he pushes those thoughts from his mind. This gig is too valuable for him to wimp out now. And really, what are the chances that something actually dangerous would be lurking in the house? The other two investigators are still looking around downstairs, sticking together, their flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. Their boss always insists on going upstairs first. He demands the glory shot, after all. That leaves the rest of them searching the downstairs living room, dining room, and kitchen, where the best they can hope for is maybe a particularly haunted-looking dishwasher. It's why the younger of the two is so surprised when they suddenly feel something happening to their body that they've never experienced before. In an instant, their whole body convulses with an involuntary shudder. They feel the temperature drop, and the world gets just that little bit darker. The best way they can describe the feeling is impending doom. Like any moment now, something terrible is going to happen. But almost as soon as the feeling begins, it's gone. Intensity dropping, the dread starting to dissipate, as though whoever or whatever caused this feeling literally passed right through them. Their fellow investigator asks them if they're okay. Of course, they nod and force a smile. They're fine. It's just a spooky place, is all. Atmosphere like this would get to anyone. Meanwhile, the lead investigator is exactly where he wants to be, ascending a rickety stepladder up into the attic, the very same attic where, all those years ago, the police had found what was left of the family. And from everything he'd read on the subject, their remains weren't a pretty sight, even by true crime enthusiast standards. He enters the attic and shines his flashlight around, capturing all the dusty old boxes left to rot in the cold. He's engrossed in the macabre spectacle of what had once been the worst and final moments of a group of strangers' very real lives. The attic is full of spider webs and shadows. They're so ubiquitous that as the lead investigator pauses to tell his camera the next chapter of the grisly tale, he doesn't even notice one of the shadows peeling off of the wall behind him. It wafts silently towards him like a gust of midnight air. Little by little, the blob of shadow starts to take on a vaguely human shape. It leans forward in the investigator's direction, arms extended like a classic movie monster. Long, dark claws slide out of its shadowy hands. Downstairs, the other two investigators hear the most terrible scream. For a moment, the more fantastical thought crosses their minds. Could this be one of the tormented souls of the departed family, longing to be heard after years of silence? Then it occurs to them that they recognize the scream. It belongs to their boss. The two of them charge up the stairs, flashlights in hand, as the screaming starts to become more desperate and pained, like that of a wounded animal with its leg caught in a trap. Those terrible wails are echoing down from the open hatch leading into the attic. It's so dark up there, something must have broken his flashlight. That's when they notice something else. Red, dripping from the open hatch. For a moment, they hesitate, wondering what could be going on up there. Could they really help, or would they just be running into the danger themselves? But soon, their desire to save their boss's life overpowers their fear. They grab the ladder and start climbing, feeling the dripping blood on the worn wooden rungs. When they finally get up into the attic, it feels like the scream is coming from everywhere, bouncing off the walls in a terrible, echoing cacophony of pain. They turn in all directions, hovering their flashlight beams around the room in wide, sweeping arcs, until both fall on the source of all this terror. And when they see it, they can't help but scream too. The lead investigator's body is floating about a foot off the ground, his screams now fading into pained gurgles. Something huge and dark is lifting him up with one hand and sinking the long, dark claws of its other into his neck. The second the twin flashlight beams concentrate on the creature, it drops the lead investigator's bleeding body down onto the ground. His skin slate gray, his feeble twitching slowing to a halt as the last of his life drains from him. Two glowing red pinpricks open up in the face of the dark figure, eyes like terrible, burning coals etching themselves into their memory. Like smoke, it continues to glide backwards further, seeking refuge in the dark, a safe haven amongst the other shadows. By this point, the two surviving investigators know there's nothing they can do for their boss anymore. All that's left is to get out and survive. They have to save themselves. They turn, wasting no time running towards the exit. They don't notice it, but the second they turn the beams of their flashlights away, the shadow's terrible eyes disappear, and it starts advancing towards them again, its claws outstretched and grasping for them with awful fury. The shadow creature grabs at their heads as they make their final leap for the exit. However, all the monster can pull away are their helmets and helmet cams as they scramble down the ladder and then down the stairs, running at speeds they didn't even think possible as the shadow slithers down behind them. It doesn't give up. It wants their lives. It wants their warm human blood on its claws. They clear the threshold of the accursed house and keep running to their car. One looks over their shoulder and sees the shadow leave the house, gaining on them, both claws outstretched and ready to rend their flesh. The two climb into their car. They see the shadow coming towards their window. It's moving so quickly, only a few feet away now. It's getting closer and closer and closer. Ignition. The car starts up and the driver smashes the pedal down. They take off, quickly accelerating up to illegal speeds as the shadow continues to chase, slowly getting smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror. A distant nightmare. A terrible, dark ghost. As it finally disappears, they feel a moment of safety. But really, only a moment. Because it occurs to them then that they cannot say, with any confidence, that this monster won't just be waiting for them when they get home. SCP-280, also known as Eyes in the Dark, is one of the more frightening and dangerous anomalies contained by the SCP Foundation. Of course, it likely won't be causing an XK-class end-of-the-world scenario anytime soon, but if you happen to run into this nocturnal monster, it's likely to cause an end-of-you scenario and remove you from the world with extreme prejudice. There's no way of telling just how many lives it claimed before the SCP Foundation finally got it into containment, and perhaps it's best to just not think about that. SCP-280 is a black wraith-like apparition that floats at roughly average human height, with no visible legs or feet, as the lower portion of its body simply fades away before it reaches the ground. In its dormant state, the entity may appear to be little more than a shadow, easily dismissed, especially in dark environments. This comes as a natural result of the being's frightening ability to become intangible at will, and only become physical when it enters a state of active aggression toward a human target. In this intangible state, victims have even been known to walk through the shadowy mass by accident. While this doesn't lead to any detrimental physical effects, victims report that being inside the creature can lead to heightened states of anxiety, fear, and dread. Despite its body being wholly composed of an unidentifiable black matter, when exposed to light, the creature does begin to express a pair of glowing dots on its head similar to eyes, hence its frightening nickname. However, all tests indicate that these eyes aren't actually functional. Instead, they appear to be a kind of defensive measure, like false eyes on the carapace of an insect. These eyes are never shown when SCP-280 is advancing towards a victim, only when it is in retreat, though this is only one of the entity's several defensive responses. If an area where the creature is residing becomes fully illuminated, or a sudden flash of extremely bright light is directed against it, then it will immediately dematerialize and appear in a different area. The one positive thing that can be said about the hunting patterns of SCP-280 is that they're relatively predictable. The entity, it seems, only has an interest in human beings. When it selects a target, it will pursue them relentlessly, approaching in its intangible form with its arms extended in what many describe as a sleepwalker pose. In this state, you may finally notice 280's claws, long, thin, and razor-sharp. It may silently approach while the victim is turned the other way, or while they sleep soundly in bed, or even when they're paralyzed in fear at the very sight of it. When SCP-280 closes the distance, it will begin to rip and tear at its victims with its claws, causing massive physical trauma and, in some cases, death. Attacks range from 1 to 5 minutes of being relentlessly clawed at by the beast. When the attack is over, it will simply expose its eyes, become intangible once more, and escape. You will not be able to overpower the creature. Foundation tests have shown that it has extreme physical strength, and it's capable of tearing apart solid steel with little effort. If it can't find any humans to victimize, then it will simply remain dormant, pressing itself up against a wall, in a dark corner, or within some other structure. Which is why, if ever you feel nervous about a certain dark corner in a room near you, it is best to remove yourself from the situation as quickly as possible and remain in a brightly lit area. It would perhaps be comforting to believe that SCP-280 is acting on some twisted form of animal instinct. After all, while the results may seem horrific to us, every organism has to eat, right? Well, sadly, that isn't the case here. SCP-280 does not appear to eat, sleep, or breathe to survive, and it never consumes any of the matter torn from its victims. The best working theory is that the entity simply enjoys the harm it causes, taking a degree of perverse pleasure in hunting down and murdering its targets. There is no better nature to appeal to here. The SCP Foundation's ability to study the creature's biology has also been stunted, in part due to the creature's highly aggressive nature, and also the fact that its selective intangibility makes gaining physical samples almost impossible. Even capturing and containing the creature in the first place came partially out of blind luck. It first came to Foundation attention after a series of mysterious locked-door murders in a small Mississippi township. In the most recent case, an entire family had been brutally murdered in their home, leaving only one survivor. A traumatized 9-year-old boy named David, who'd locked himself in the basement when he started to hear the screaming. He was so terrified by the things he saw that night that he remained in a catatonic state for weeks afterwards, completely unresponsive to outside stimulus. But one little detail saved his life. A flashlight was clasped in his white-knuckle grip, shining a bright beam of cold, white light onwards. When David was removed and placed into medical care, officers began searching the building for any kind of clues as to how the other 4 family members were murdered. However, during this investigation, the police were just as vulnerable as the victims who'd been so recently slain. While one officer was wandering around the attic, looking for any evidence they may have missed, SCP-280 emerged from the darkness and attacked, tearing into his body with its long, deadly claws. Luckily for the officer in question, he survived the incident, though he was badly wounded. His report on the matter, including the ardent claim that he was attacked by a being, quote, made from black smoke, caught the attention of SCP Foundation operatives embedded in the precinct. They soon took over the investigation and descended on the house, hoping to tag and bag whatever had been behind all these deaths. This would be easier said than done. While Foundation field agents canvassed the home, they simply walked past the creature multiple times, discounting it as a mere shadow. After all, it only had these easily identifiable glowing eyes when it was in a retreating position. Even when it entered its physical state, operatives brushing up against it generally dismissed the sensation as hair, clothing, or some other object touching them in the dark. This already bungled investigation got even worse when the Foundation decided to introduce high-intensity lights into the equation, hopefully flushing the creature out. This, of course, only caused it to dematerialize and appear elsewhere. The chase ended in an almost farcical fashion, a cavalcade of Foundation agents chasing a cloud of smearing black smoke across a Mississippi field at 2:30 a.m. Thankfully for the human race, the entity was, at the very least, eventually secured and contained. However, this wouldn't be the last time it was out of containment. During a series of tests with different types of illumination, intending to test SCP-280's reflexes, it disappeared from its chamber. It seemed almost to sink through the different levels of the illuminated site, before coming to rest at the containment chamber holding SCP-1591. This made for a fascinating accidental cross-test. You see, SCP-1591, to put it simply, is a unique sculpture of a star that emits an incredibly bright light, and this light will slowly make any being subject to its glow intangible, before disappearing completely. When SCP-280 came before SCP-1591, it displayed its eyes but did not retreat. In fact, it assumed a kneeling position and simply remained before the anomalous sculpture until it faded from existence. It then remanifested in its own containment chamber several hours later without incident. All things considered, it went pretty well as far as containment breaches involving deadly, human-hating monsters go. Because of its ability to demanifest and phase through solid objects, SCP-280 is incredibly difficult to contain, earning it the dreaded Keter object class. In order to avoid the risk of demanifestation, SCP-280 is contained in a 5x5 meter cell that is perpetually left in a state of total darkness. No equipment is to be left in the cell unsupervised at any time, and any items brought into the cell for testing must be removed when the testing is complete. Any staff members entering the chamber for tests must be equipped with infrared goggles, an infrared ID strobe, and also a strong flashlight to ward the creature off in the case that it becomes aggressive. If SCP-280 does attempt to attack anyone in the chamber, all attending staff are instructed to turn on their flashlights and turn the beams against the creature. No aggressive action is permitted, and staff members must remain at least 1 meter away from SCP-280 at all times for their own safety. And if you suddenly feel yourself getting a little nervous in an eerily dark room, I'd like you to remember this. The one thing more frightening than seeing eyes in the dark is not seeing them. As night falls, everything sinks into a soft blue darkness under a blanket of twinkling stars. In a nice, cozy home, in a normal, quiet suburb, a sweet little boy is being read a bedtime story by his mother. It's a classic, Little Red Riding Hood, the story of a little girl traveling through the woods to her grandmother's house, only to be set upon by the big bad wolf. A tale as old as time, with an important message for people of all ages. We should fear what lurks in the dark, since what is there is often waiting and watching with hungry eyes. As the boy lays in bed, clutching the top of his blanket, his mother continues telling him the tale. She describes the tiny girl in the red hood, holding a little wicker basket, stumbling through the dark. The wolf, with its big, hungry eyes, weaves through the darkness of the trees, following her every move. The little boy can barely contain his fear when Little Red Riding Hood opens the door to her grandmother's old cottage and creeps inside, where she realizes that something is very wrong. Her grandmother looks different. Those great big eyes, that twitching wet black nose, those huge terrible teeth dripping with saliva. All the better to eat you with, my dear. His mother senses that her son isn't taking this well and notices that he's shuddering underneath the blankets. She closes the book, smiles, and insists that the story has a happy ending. This does nothing to ease the growing specter of fear stretching out over the boy. Could the big bad wolf be waiting outside his window, watching him with those red, ravenous eyes? Would the window really keep such a monster at bay? He doesn't feel so sure. The little boy's mother kisses him on the forehead and tells him that if he needs anything, she and his father are just down the hall. He's been having nightmares lately, but that's all they are. Nightmares, all in his head. Nothing in there could actually hurt him. He's alone now, shivering in bed, trying to focus on the light of his tiny nightlight plugged into his wall, a little glowing friend that will watch over him and keep him safe. His mom and dad got it for him when he told them he was afraid of the dark. But there's still a lot more dark in this room than light. His closet door suddenly creaks open, and he bites his tongue to stifle a scream. It's an old door. It opens by itself sometimes. There's nothing to worry about at all. It's a mantra his parents had drilled into him on prior instances when this door had creaked open. Even in the dark, the little boy can make out something. It looks like one of the many other shadows created by his nightlight, but it's different. Something darker than the dark. And it's moving, sliding out of his closet. A fog shaped like some unknowable creature. There's nothing to worry about at all, he tells himself over and over again. The fog leaves the closet entirely, and it starts getting closer to the boy's bed. As it rises up from the floor, the boy can see something in the fog. He can see eyes. Big, glowing, hungry eyes. Like the eyes of a big bad wolf, ready to eat him alive. He opens his mouth to scream, but only a yawn comes out. He wants to get up and run to his parents' room down the hall, but his body feels so heavy, his movements so slow and sluggish. He can't move, and the eyes of the monster made of dark keep getting closer. There's nothing to worry about. Nothing to... Mom, Dad, please help me. All he can do is think about screaming, not actually make any noise, as his eyes shut, and he drifts off into the land of dreams. He opens his eyes to find that he's standing in a dark and endless forest. The trees are tall, extending up into a black and starless sky. But there's something wrong with them. Bodies, hundreds of them, old and desiccated, are speared onto their branches, their faces locked into what looks like permanent, silent screams. A thick, viscous black liquid drips from some of the bodies, pooling into what looks like puddles of tar around his feet. When he looks down, he sees that he's wearing strange, old-fashioned clothes. His shirt is bright red. There's a low, bassy growling behind him, like thunder, like a rumbling earthquake, primal and deadly. He can feel it vibrating in his bones. Moving slowly, as though he was underwater, he turns and sees the beast looming behind him. A giant, wolf-like monster made from shadows, teeth cut from jagged black glass, eyes glowing and hungry. He's never been so terrified in his life as he is right now, standing in front of this monster that seemed to be the literal embodiment of fear, the embodiment of deep animal terror, the beast that haunts the dreams of every frightened boy and girl. It growls again, and he begins to run. But it's not real running. It's dream running, as if the gravity were too strong, slow and cumbersome through the thick, confining air. He keeps pushing through the resistance all around him, but the wolf made of shadows moves quickly. It weaves through the trees, its mouth dripping wet with hunger, its eyes emitting a dim glow like the nightlight back in his bedroom. He runs for what feels like hours, tears streaking down his cheeks, until finally he can see salvation in the distance. A house standing in the middle of a clearing in the woods. But not just any house. It's his house. In the logic of the dream, he knew that his mom and dad would be inside. They'd help him. They'd keep him safe from the monster. He just needs to get there. He just needs to survive. He finally reaches the front door and tries to open it, but it's locked. So he hammers his fists against the wood, screaming and crying for his parents. He looks over his shoulder and sees the shadow wolf charging towards him through the darkness of the woods, its huge, dark feet hitting the ground with the speed and force of gunshots, getting closer and closer and closer. With one final desperate pound of his fist, the door to his home finally swings open and he falls through. The door closes behind him as he hits the floor, and the sound of the wolf is gone. He gets up and looks out of a nearby window to see that there's no forest outside, just his neighborhood again, underneath a starless sky. He looks down and sees he's not wearing those strange, old-fashioned clothes anymore, just the same pajamas he'd worn to bed. Are things back to normal now? Had it all been a dream? He tries a nearby light switch, but nothing happens. Still dark. That dread comes creeping back in. If it had been a dream, what did that make this? He starts making his way up the stairs, calling out to his mom and dad. There's no response. He climbs further, walking down the hallway towards their bedroom door. The hallway seems so much longer than he remembered it, but for some reason, he never stops to question the discrepancy. He just wants his mother and father. Not long after, the little boy reaches the door to his parents' bedroom and opens it. The room is so dark, but he can make out their forms lying in the bed. He approaches, calling for them again, but there's no response. Instead, he just hears an awful wheezing sound, like air being let out of a balloon. When his eyes adjust to the dark, he sees that something is terribly wrong with both of his parents. They're now old and thin, with sickly yellowing skin hanging from their bones. Their eyes, milky with cataracts, are set deep in their jaundiced faces. The mere sight of them forces a gasp out of him. Their heads slowly turn with audible crunches. Their chests rise and fall in those same slow, mechanical exhalations. They both look like life hurts for them now. The little boy begins to cry. They beckon him closer, wanting to comfort him, but he's too terrified of their appearance to take a single step towards them. His mother opens her thin-lipped mouth, revealing rotten teeth, and says, "Sweetheart, I'm so sorry, but Mommy and Daddy can't take care of you anymore. We can't even be here for much longer. We need to go. I'm sorry that we don't have more time." The little boy can see his parents aging by the second, getting thinner and frailer and sicker right in front of him. His pity and fear outweighs his revulsion. and he steps forward to embrace them. They're so terribly cold. He grips his mother's hand, but he can feel the bones turning to dust inside her paper-thin skin. "It's going to be okay, darling," she whispers, her voice hoarse and brittle in her final moments. "Your grandmother will take care of you from now on." That's when he hears it behind him again. That terrible, low rumble, the primal growl. As his parents both turn to dust in their bed, he turns and sees the monster, the same wolf made of shadows, filling up the doorway. It seems even bigger in here, bulging through the doorway, thick black saliva dripping from its obsidian fangs. He tries to repeat that same mantra to himself. There's nothing to worry about at all. But suddenly he's short of breath as an immense shadowy claw closes around his torso. It lifts him up off the ground until he can feel the beast's breath on his face, but it isn't hot like it should be. It's freezing, like a gust of wind in the deep snow. With a deep, commanding voice, the monster says, "Only lucky children get to wake up from a dream like this, and not everyone can be lucky." All he can do is scream when the wolf's jaws close around his head, but not a soul can hear him. He's swallowed up into the darkness of the monster, and soon, he's nothing at all. In the waking world, the sun rises, morning birds caw and tweet, alarms go off. But when the little boy's mother checks his bed that morning, it's empty. He's vanished without a trace. In the panic of the days, weeks, and months that follow, in the extensive search that turns up nothing, and that unlucky little boy was never seen again, it never even occurs to his parents to ask, "Did we leave that closet door open?" Did you suffer from bad dreams as a child? Night terrors? There's no shame in it. It's not an uncommon affliction after all. Perhaps there's a hazy, half-formed memory in your mind of waking up screaming when your parents turned on the lights, comforting you, telling you that it was just a bad dream and nothing more. But what if it wasn't? What if it was SCP-080? This vaporous entity, nicknamed the Dark Form by some who have worked with it, is every child's worst nightmare. And if you give it a chance, every adult's worst nightmare too. That's because this black, smoke-like figure has the anomalous ability to induce extreme drowsiness in anyone who spends more than half an hour near it in the dark. Shortly after falling asleep, if nobody comes in and rescues the victim by turning on the lights, they will experience the most horrible nightmares you can possibly imagine. So horrible, in fact, that those who have suffered these nightmares and survive often experience irreparable, lifelong psychological trauma. And in the grand scheme of things, those are still the lucky ones. If you're unlucky, like the little boy who vanished from his bed, you'll disappear forever, consumed by SCP-080. The creature itself is difficult to properly see due to its lack of consistent form, and due to the fact that it only appears in the darkness, but those who have witnessed it can only seem to remember one key detail: glowing eyes in the smoke. Because of its preference for dark places, SCP-080 often takes refuge in closets and under the bed, where it can vanish out of sight. Bright light automatically causes the creature to disappear and manifest elsewhere, and therefore, should you start feeling unusually drowsy in the dark, turning on the lights is the best thing to do. But these must be bright lights. The soft glow of a standard children's nightlight is not powerful enough to ward off the creature. The SCP Foundation conducted a series of experiments, hoping to see whether SCP-080 had any kind of real physical body, and if it was possible for human beings to safely interact with it. In the first of these experiments, a 19-year-old male D-Class was sent into the chamber to interact with SCP-080. Unsurprisingly, he immediately became extremely distressed upon seeing the figure with glowing eyes forming in the dark. He described it as being human-shaped, but far too big to be a human. He begged to be released from the chamber, but by this point, he'd already started yawning, and the drowsiness was setting in. The researchers running the experiment wanted to see what would happen next, though, and eventually, his pleas to be released fell silent as he drifted off to sleep. When guards were finally sent in to check on him, they found nothing at all. Nothing remained of the D-Class. He'd been consumed by SCP-080, just like so many others. Next, a 30-year-old female D-Class was sent into SCP-080's chamber. When she was able to make out the vaporous form with the glowing eyes, she was instructed to try and physically touch it. She followed the orders. However, upon touching the entity directly, she immediately fell unconscious. She was quickly retrieved from the room, since the Foundation wanted to make sure they could interview her rather than letting SCP-080 consume her. According to a physical exam given to her by the Foundation medics, she'd experienced no physical effects. Her mind, on the other hand, was a very different story. She'd vacillate wildly between a state of borderline catatonia and extreme paranoid distress. In a debriefing meeting with a Foundation researcher, she had difficulty recounting what exactly had happened during her test with SCP-080. When she did begin to recollect, she started screaming in terror and yelling about how they would try to take her back to the monster. Then, without warning, she leaped across the table and began to attack the researcher, forcing the attending guards to intervene, and unfortunately, they were forced to terminate her. It seemed as though this was always the intended effect of her outburst. She preferred death from a Foundation guard over experiencing SCP-080 again. The testing continued, though, and a third subject was sent into the room, a 24-year-old D-Class male dosed on a powerful amphetamine to hopefully ward off the drowsiness-inducing effects of SCP-080. This did not appear to work, though, and over time, the same sleepiness started to set in. The amphetamine, however, still caused elevated levels of aggression, and the D-Class began to express violent intent towards SCP-080. He approached the vaporous mass and attempted to strike it, but when his fist touched the entity, he immediately collapsed. When his body was retrieved, it was found that he died of a sudden massive heart attack. During the autopsy, as Foundation staff examined his body, they reported feeling a profound sense of discomfort and unease, as though they were being watched. The retrieval team also reported feeling acutely aware of SCP-080 watching them as they exited the chamber with the final D-Class's body. The mere presence of SCP-080 then started causing problems for some staff members at the containment site. The researchers assigned to SCP-080 reported strange and unsettling dreams, and that they were occurring at an unusually frequent level, disrupting their sleep patterns and, by extension, their work performance. This led to them discovering the possibility that SCP-080 may have some kind of hazardous mimetic effect that can linger among its victims even when they aren't in its direct proximity. After the lead researcher on the team walked into traffic and sadly passed away, it was made mandatory for all staff members working in SCP-080's sector to keep comprehensive dream journals so that the emergence of patterns of violent or unsettling dreams could be detected before things got too out of hand, just like they had with the lead researcher. However, the lead researcher would not be the last to lose his life to SCP-080. Two researchers stood just beyond the blackout curtains, observing SCP-080 for 40 minutes, believing that the divider would keep them safe from SCP-080's negative anomalous effects. They were terribly wrong. Both apparently fell asleep in the observation area, and when another researcher later entered the room, they discovered that their bodies were gone. However, strangely enough, everyone working in that sector of the site found that they did have a better night's sleep after the incident. Staff were reminded to exercise maximum caution whenever interfacing with SCP-080. Their direct exposure should never exceed 30 minutes under any circumstances, even the section of staff members that, for some reason, are completely unable to see SCP-080 and appear to somehow be immune to its effects. Considering the fact that everyone around the site started feeling better after the strange incident concerning the two missing researchers, researchers have sought O5 Council permission to feed a D-Class to the monster once a month in order to negate the damaging effects it has on site staff mental health. Despite the protests of the Ethics Committee, a member of the Council approved the measure. SCP-080 is contained in a 4-meter by 4-meter room with a smaller antechamber located on the south wall for easy research access. There's also an observation room on the north wall, separated with blackout curtains to prevent light from getting in and dispersing SCP-080. Containment procedures dictate that SCP-080 should never, under any circumstances, be removed from the chamber. Any light-producing devices are also forbidden. While the Foundation currently has this monster under lock and key, all it would take is a stray ray of light to free it once more, which has warranted it being given the Euclid containment class. All members of staff are also kindly remembered to stop referring to this creature as the Boogeyman. After all, there's a lot of power in giving a fear-manipulating creature a name like that, and the last thing we want is SCP-080 having more power than it already has. A hand clasps around your throat, cutting off your scream. You try to move, but the hands of the two people restraining you won't allow it. You're being dragged towards something monstrous and terrible in the corner. something hiding under a white sheet. You will die a painful death, and the ones dragging you towards it are your parents. As the dewy green of summer begins to fade, the grass drying, the air chilling, and the leaves turning shades of fire and gold, most children's thoughts turn to Halloween. Visions of fun-sized candy bars spilling out of plastic pumpkin buckets, of ill-fitting rubber masks that smell like the back of a party store, of candy apples and ringing doorbells, and terrifying their friends with scary stories. It's a magical time where anyone can be anything, and candy is free to anyone who asks the question, trick or treat. But as those children get older, Halloween begins to lose its magic. They age out of trick-or-treating and no longer find themselves amused by carving pumpkins or screaming at plastic skeletons in their neighbors' yards. They age out of the sense of wonder, and they find that their neighbors aren't as keen to give away candy to someone with a driver's license. But some children hold on to that love of Halloween into adulthood, transforming the childlike joy into an appreciation for parties, more mature scary stories with blood and guts aplenty, and yes, themed baked goods. You're never too old to enjoy a Rice Krispie treat shaped like a ghost. At least that's what the sorority girl planning the biggest Halloween party on campus at her small university believes. She has festooned the sorority house with fake cobwebs and ghosts made of hanging bits of gauze, with plastic spiders and zombies made of rubber. There are the classic plastic skeletons, the jack-o'-lanterns filled with battery-powered candles, no fire hazards here, and of course, a huge cauldron filled with punch and dry ice. Smoke billows over the sides of the cauldron as she stirs the garish but inviting lime green liquid inside. She has the lights rigged up to give the place an eerie red glow, and has the perfect playlist of Halloween music put together. Now she just needs to wait for the guests to arrive. At first, she worries that no one will come. The first few people to ring the doorbell turn out to be trick-or-treaters, and she sends them away with a fistful of candy bars and a smile. But each time, she is secretly a little disappointed. About an hour after she finished setting up, guests begin to arrive. Even if not everyone at school is into Halloween, there are very few college students who will pass up an opportunity for a party, and before long, the house is filled with dancing pirates, vampires sipping cups of punch, werewolves digging into bowls of chips, and cats flirting with dogs. Everyone is dressed up and embracing the Halloween spirit, and the girl couldn't be happier. She's been so busy playing hostess that she almost forgot to dress up, but she takes a moment to steal away upstairs and put on her costume. A classic witch costume, black dress, black shoes, and complete with a pointy black hat. As she heads back downstairs, dressed up and ready to have a great time, she takes a moment to survey the crowd. It seems like everyone on campus decided to come to her party. The girl is going to get herself a drink and settle in to enjoy her party when she hears the doorbell ring. Someone else is here. But as she walks toward the door, she pauses for a moment, an icy chill of dread washing over her. The party guests know that they can just walk right in. That's what they've been doing all night. And it's almost midnight, much too late for trick-or-treaters. Who's out there? She peers through the peephole and sees someone in a rudimentary ghost costume, covered head to toe in a white sheet. Even if it's someone she knows, she wouldn't be able to recognize them like that. She can't explain why, but she has a bad feeling about this person. She doesn't want to be rude, but she wants to let them in even less. She turns back away from the door, ready to let the stranger stand on her porch all night, and finds all of her party guests standing still, staring at the door, staring at her. She tries to laugh it off and get everyone to return to the party, but the energy in the room has shifted. Everyone's focus is on the person on the other side of the door. She walks to the punch bowl, pours herself a cup, and encourages everyone to get back to the party. Instead, a pirate and a mermaid walk to the door, turning the knob even as the girl asks them to stop. They open it, letting the stranger in the sheet inside. The figure glides through the door, moving in a way that seems just a little bit off. The girl is struck with a feeling that she hasn't experienced since she was a little girl, the sense, deep down in her gut, that something could really be a monster. Whatever she does, she can't let the thing in the sheet get close to her. She doesn't know what will happen, but the thought of it turns her stomach with a primal sense of danger. She starts to run, but a girl dressed as a tiger grabs hold of her arm, wrenching her back. The girl struggles to free herself, but a man in a vampire costume grabs her other arm, gripping her so tight his knuckles turn white, and she can feel the flesh bruising. She pleads with her friends, trying to get them to see reason and release her, but they won't budge. The tiger girl apologizes through tears, but won't let go. As the girl thrashes, pulling so hard to free herself that she worries her arm will break, the figure in the sheet inches closer and closer. She shouts at it, demanding to know who it is, what it wants, why it's hiding behind that sheet. But it doesn't say a word, doesn't give a clue. There's no expression to read, only the blank white fabric. When it reaches the girl, her feet fly out from under her, and she collapses to the ground, yanked forward by an unseen force. Something is pulling her under the sheet. She claws at the floor, trying to drag herself away from the force, but she can't. The party guests watch, helpless, as their hostess disappears under the sheet, until the only thing left is her writhing silhouette and her screams. Then, the screams go quiet. Nothing left of the girl but her witch's hat lying on the floor. The figure gathers its sheet around itself and calmly walks out of the party. Those unfortunate guests watch their even more unfortunate friend encounter the creature known as SCP-6096. SCP-6096 is a humanoid entity that spends all of its time hidden beneath a large cotton sheet. A vague sense of its shape can be garnered by observing the entity, but its body is hidden at all times, preventing a complete physical description from being recorded. However, Foundation researchers have determined via a cursory examination that the entity is 1.55 meters tall and that it weighs approximately 48 kilograms. The sheet itself is larger than SCP-6096's body, trailing on the ground behind it by at least a meter whenever the entity moves. All attempts to remove the sheet in order to get a proper look at the thing have been unsuccessful. One of the most unusual properties of SCP-6096 is that it cannot be harmed. I don't mean that it is impervious to damage, but rather that any living being that attempts to engage in a behavior that would harm the entity finds themselves unable to do so. This includes, but is presumably not limited to, actions such as attempting to attack SCP-6096, attempting to order others to attack SCP-6096, attempting to trick others into attacking SCP-6096 without their knowledge, laying a trap for SCP-6096, ordering others to lay a trap for SCP-6096, creating an autonomous device that would harm SCP-6096, attempting to leave SCP-6096 unsupervised and in harm's way, and attempting to remove SCP-6096's sheet. Most of the time, SCP-6096's behavior is described as peaceful and docile. As long as there is no danger present, it allows itself to be led into containment and remains there with seemingly no objections. However, every so often, the entity becomes active and will attempt to leave its location. It does so at a steady pace with single-minded persistence as it pursues one specific target at a time. It is uncertain how the entity chooses a target, but so far, it has always been a seemingly random human being somewhere on Earth. Not only does SCP-6096 know exactly who its target is, but anyone who observes the entity during an active period finds that they too know who it is seeking out. In addition to this anomalous effect, the person will also find themselves compelled to help SCP-6096 reach its intended target. These targets appear to be the only individuals unaffected by SCP-6096's anti-harm properties. A person that the entity has selected will, in fact, be able to harm it. However, none have managed to successfully do so, mainly due to the protective influence of the other humans caught in the creature's anomalous thrall. But what happens when SCP-6096 reaches its target? Research into this has been largely inconclusive, but a few facts are certain. SCP-6096 will pull the person underneath its sheet until they have disappeared from view. If the victim is conscious, they can be heard fighting, struggling, and screaming in unimaginable agony for up to 40 minutes. Then they go silent and are never seen again. Once its chosen victim has disappeared, SCP-6096 becomes docile and largely immobile again, and can be led back to containment. Whatever happens to its targets under that sheet, it is definitely not anything good. SCP-6096 was discovered by the SCP Foundation on September 12, 2018, when police were called to the home of the Mallion family in the town of Durham, New Mexico. Samuel and Amanda Mallion greeted the officers in a state of distress, claiming that a person wearing a sheet had come into their home and somehow caused their 16-year-old son Desmond to disappear. Authorities spotted SCP-6096 inside the home and planned to remove the sheet in order to interrogate and detain the suspect, but found themselves unable to take another step closer to the thing. Terrified by their inexplicable encounter, they submitted an incident report to their supervisor, who passed it up through the chain of command in the regional government until it landed in the hands of the SCP Foundation. Alongside the police report, the Foundation was able to access security camera footage from the Malian family home. A transcription of the video's contents is included in the official Foundation files. I'll do my best to summarize its events. The home security footage depicts the Malian family sitting on their living room couch, facing the television. Samuel and Amanda watch a program on TV as Desmond idly scrolls through his phone. Outside, a car can be heard pulling into the driveway. Though the driver's identity has not been confirmed, this is believed to be a local taxi driver named Drake Ellen, dropping SCP-6096 off at the Malian's door. A moment later, Samuel draws his wife's attention toward a window. At first, the two are surprised but amused, assuming that SCP-6096 is some sort of errant Halloween decoration. However, they become increasingly disturbed as the sheet-covered figure approaches their door and begins to knock, so softly it is nearly inaudible. As Samuel gets up to enter the door, Amanda grabs her son's arm, holding him in an increasingly tight grip and refusing to let him pull away. Unable to stop herself, no matter how upset she becomes, she holds Desmond still as her husband lets SCP-6096 into the house. It glides across the floor toward Desmond, who struggles to break free from his crying mother's grasp. Amanda can be heard reassuring him, saying, "You just stay still, honey. You just close your eyes. It won't hurt if you just close your eyes. I love you." Desmond struggles harder, but finds himself unable to break his mother's hold. He kicks his legs, knocking his phone to the ground as the sheet-covered entity draws closer and closer. He begs his mother to let him go, but she doesn't budge. His father, through tears, says, "Just stay still, son. Just stay still. It won't hurt for long. It can't hurt for long. Stay strong. Stay strong for me." Starting with his feet, the entity begins to cover Desmond with its sheet, pulling him out of sight. Amanda and Samuel watch in wordless, open-mouthed horror, silent screams stretching their faces into masks of terror and grief. Desmond can be heard screaming, thrashing violently beneath the sheet, though what exactly is happening to him under there cannot be seen. This continues for the next 36 minutes, until Desmond has completely vanished. At this point, SCP-6096 wraps itself in its sheet and sits down on the floor, watching the television without a care in the world. Amanda and Samuel, on the other hand, find themselves able to move on their own again, and must reckon with what they just saw, what they just participated in. Samuel collapses to the ground, curling up in the fetal position and rocking back and forth in shock. Amanda stumbles backward, keeping her eyes locked on SCP-6096, and dials 911 on her cell phone. They stay right there until the police arrive. At this point, the video log cuts out. After the SCP Foundation was notified of the incident at the Malian family home, Foundation officers administered Class A amnestics to Amanda and Samuel, as well as to all responding officers who encountered SCP-6096. It is uncertain how long SCP-6096 was operating before this incident, or where it could have come from. SCP-6096's containment is strictly under the jurisdiction of Mobile Task Force Zeta-29, Blood Brothers. The anomaly is kept in a standard humanoid containment chamber, located on the grounds of Site-19, where it is monitored by on-site personnel via video and audio recording devices. If any changes in its behavior are noted, they are to be promptly logged and reported. Unlike most anomalies at the SCP Foundation, SCP-6096 is permitted to leave its containment area whenever it chooses. Whenever it does choose to leave, SCP-6096 must be escorted to its intended destination by MTF Zeta-29. Task Force members may use whatever method of transportation is most convenient at the time. While this group is escorting the entity, a secondary team will travel to its intended target, dosing them with a high-grade tranquilizer to render them unconscious. Once the entity has disposed of its target, it will be accompanied back to its containment chamber. There are no easy jobs at the SCP Foundation, aside from the lucky few who get to spend their days playing with SCP-999. But staff assigned to the containment, if you can even call it that, of SCP-6096 report some of the lowest morale levels at the organization. A welcome notice from Charlie Szymanski, commander of Mobile Task Force Zeta-29, Blood Brothers, is included in the official file, presumably for Task Force member eyes only. Nevertheless, I feel it is important that I share the contents of this note with all of you, as they provide a valuable look into the perspective of the members of this unfortunate task force. It reads, And there you have it. Welcome to Mobile Task Force Zeta 29. No need to worry about professionalism down here. The higher-ups couldn't demote me if they wanted to. Apparently my presence as the head of SCP-6096 containment is beneficial enough to it that me being reassigned would count as harming it. Lucky me. You're probably wondering how we can be shameless enough to say we have this thing under containment. It comes and goes whenever it feels like it, and if it ever decided it didn't want to come back to its containment cell, we have literally no way of forcing it. And yeah, you're probably also thinking that calling that room a containment chamber instead of a hotel room is just as shameful. To that I say, you're absolutely right. There's nothing we can do against SCP-6096. Feel free to self-medicate until you're able to accept that. Don't hold back. You're going to become very familiar with that feeling of gnawing guilt. I know I did, the first time I had to hold the door to a maternity ward open for this thing. The idea of containing SCP-6096 is a bad joke. We all decided a long time ago that the only way out of this nightmare is liquidation, decommissioning, neutralization, whatever you want to call it. But that's no walk in the park either. I've stood in that chamber for hours, gun pointed at 6096's head, screaming at my finger just to tighten slightly. Didn't work. You can't harm SCP-6096, no matter how much you want to. You can't even try to start a Rube Goldberg kind of thing to eventually harm SCP-6096. It's just a fact of the world, maybe a semiohazard or whatever it's called. The way I see it then, there are three main ways out of this nightmare. One, another organization, maybe the GOC, takes a shot at it without realizing what they're dealing with. Maybe they think we're transporting something much more dangerous. Maybe they think we're in over our heads with it, and they take it out with a drone or something, blow the thing to hell while we're transporting it. A bomb would kill it easy, I think. It feels weak. This would only work so long as the GOC thinks they're bombing something else entirely. If they knew it was SCP-6096, they'd just be contained too. 2. An AIC deals with it. I don't know if an artificial intelligence is immune to SCP-6096's effects, but the fact that it won't let me tell one of them about it gives me hope. Maybe one day one of those computers gets a mission, and maybe that mission, by complete coincidence, happens to lead them over to this file. Then they use their superior intelligence to set things up so 6096 runs into an accident out of the blue. 3. A target gets lucky. Maybe 6096 goes after a gun nut, and the poor guy gets a lucky shot in before we can hold him down. This almost happened once, but Lopez took the bullet. Poor guy bled out while we were holding the target down for 6096. Maybe it'll happen again, go better. Maybe. Let's be honest. These scenarios aren't scenarios, they're fantasies. The odds of any of these things happening on their own are tiny, minuscule. The only thing that can really do 6096 in, far as I can see, is sheer coincidence. All we can do is wait and hope. Hope for one of us to make a genuine mistake that gets the right dominoes falling. But I wouldn't hold your breath. After all, we're so good at what we do. Of all the anomalies I have studied, SCP-6096 is one that troubles me more than almost any other. I have lost sleep watching the Malian family security footage again and again, each time shocked by the sight of two tearful parents helping a sheet-covered stranger steal their only son, doing who knows what to him in the process. No matter how hard I try, I cannot discern SCP-6096's motives, its origins, or even what its real face looks like. Perhaps it doesn't have one. Perhaps there's nothing under that sheet. The hardest part is knowing that I will likely never know. That uncertainty is so much worse than any of the horrible truths I have uncovered in my years of studying the anomalies that hide in the shadows of our world. Though I may never uncover the answers to the mystery of SCP-6096, there is one thing I know for certain. I will never be able to relax around Halloween. That walking bedsheet might be someone who ran out of time to plan a proper costume and just grabbed the first thing they could find. Or it could be a faceless horror walking with the relaxed gait of the incomprehensibly powerful on its way to claim another unfortunate soul.
Ouch! The boy on the bus turns around. Did someone pull out one of his hairs? He looks around, but the girl in the seat behind him is staring out the window. She's so quiet and always keeps to herself, he doesn't think it possibly could have been her. The boy turns back around, wondering if he just imagined it, unable to see the small smile forming on the girl's face. The bus stops, and the girl practically sprints off and up the sidewalk to her house. She runs past her mother without saying hello and goes straight into her bedroom, closing and locking the door behind her. She sits at her desk, opens a drawer, and pulls out a small bag. She reaches into the bag and takes out a folded piece of paper. Congratulations on your purchase of a genuine Knotty Stalker. Do you love someone but they won't give you the time of day? Do you wish you could hear what they say about you behind their back? Well, wonder no more. Using this fantabulous product, you can keep track of your loved one's every move, their every word. The girl imagines herself watching a tiny version of the boy on the bus right here on her desk, seeing everything that he does, listening to his secret thoughts and desires. If only she knew him better, then she'd have the confidence to talk to him and could get him to like her as much as she liked him. She reaches into the bag and pulls out the Knotty Stalker. It doesn't look like much, just a little doll made from a woven and twisted length of red string. She looks back to the instructions. All you have to do is get a single hair from the head of the object of your desires, slip it under a loose string in our Knotty Stalker, and see what you've been missing. The girl reaches into her pocket and takes out a single strand of hair. She holds the hair up to the light, looking at it. If this works, it will mean all of her dreams coming true. Just like the instructions said to do, she takes the hair and slides it under a string on the doll's body. She sets the doll down on her desk and waits. And waits. And nothing happens. She picks up the instructions again, turning them over, but there's nothing else except another wonderful product brought to you by blah blah blah. Where were the rest of the instructions on how to get it to work? Why wasn't the doll coming to life? What a piece of junk. Wait.
Huh?
What was that? The girl leans in close. Is the doll breathing? She's startled as the doll turns its head over its shoulder, seemingly looking right at her, or rather, right through her. "Coming, Mom," the doll shouts before standing up. It starts to walk in place, looking like it is opening invisible doors, and then sitting down on a chair that she can't see. It looks like it's pretending to eat dinner. The girl's eyes widen. The doll is alive. It's really alive. It's actually showing what the boy is doing right now. The Knotty Stalker has worked. The girl is fascinated by watching the little doll that gives her a peek into her crush's life. She skips her own dinner so she can watch him finish his. She watches as he sits, probably watching TV, takes a shower, and gets ready for bed. It may all just be a little doll acting it out, but it feels like she is there with him. She watches the doll sleep for hours before falling finally asleep herself, her head resting on the desk next to him. The next morning, she passes by the boy and his friend sitting together on the bus and goes to the very back. She gets as low in the seat as she can so no one can see her, and takes out the doll, holding it up to her ear. She listens to one side of the conversation as the boy talks about the action movie he watched last night, Weapon of Mass Extinction. The boy talks about how much he liked it and how it's his new favorite movie. This was perfect. It's exactly what she needed. The next day in school, as the boy is putting things into his locker, the girl approaches. She pretends to trip and drops her books in front of him, the books scattering on the floor in front of him. The boy helps her pick them up and notices the DVD she dropped, Weapons of Mass Extinction. She explains that she brought her favorite movie to school to loan it to a friend. What a coincidence that they both happen to love the same film. The boy and the girl, bonding over their love of low-budget sci-fi action films, start spending more and more time together. No one has ever understood him the way that she does. It's as if she has known him for years, even though they've only been friends for a few days. Things move quickly though, and before long, he realizes that he is having romantic feelings for the girl. This is all the girl had ever wanted, and it's all thanks to the Knotty Stalker. Things are going so well, in fact, that she imagines she won't even need it much longer. But then, something strange happens. She is sure she heard the boy tell his friend that he loved baseball, but when she brings up the idea of going to a game together, the boy looks at her like she was crazy. He hated baseball. After that, things seem to change. The boy is still so nice when they are together. Now it sounds like he is talking about her behind her back. She worries that she has been wrong this whole time, that he has just been messing with her. This stupid doll isn't making her dreams come true. It's making her life a nightmare. But wait, who is the boy talking to? She leans in close to listen. Is he with another girl? Listening to one side of the conversation, she hears the boy tell someone that this is all just a big joke, a prank he is pulling on some dumb girl. Are they? No, they can't be. Kissing? The girl is in a white-hot rage. She can't believe he would do this to her, after she was nothing but perfect to him. She throws the doll across her room. She's going to confront the boy and whoever he's with. She'll teach him a lesson. She'll teach both of them a lesson. It's starting to rain as the girl gets her bike out and starts to ride to where she knows he is, the spot that was supposed to be their own special place. Cars pass close by on the narrow road, splashing her with water, but she doesn't care. She finally reaches the picnic spot where he took her just a few days ago, and she sees a car parked nearby. It must belong to the evil seductress he is with. The girl glares at the car. She grits her teeth until they feel like they might crack. Her fists are clenched so tight that she can't tell if it's the rain or blood from her fingernails digging in that she feels running down her palms. But she doesn't care. She's going to show both of them what happens when you break someone's heart. She takes a step towards the car, and the car that struck her slams on its brakes. The driver gets out and rushes towards her. It's the boy. Her boy. The older couple who were stopped on the side of the road with a flat tire run over to help. The boy gets down next to her and cradles her head in his lap, and they have one last moment to look into each other's eyes before the light fades from hers. Unfortunately for all involved, their lives would never be the same. But how could they have known that they were the victims of an encounter with an anomaly that, while small, is extremely dangerous? One that is known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-693, the Knotty Stalker. SCP-693 are multiple humanoid-shaped dolls, measuring roughly 18 centimeters in length, each made from a single string that is either red, blue, yellow, or black, with onyx beads for eyes. Their clothing will vary in color and style, and seems to have no bearing on the properties of the doll. The string doll will behave exactly as one would expect, showing no anomalous properties at all, until the owner takes the steps that are spelled out in the instructions that always accompany SCP-693. The instruction sheet congratulates the owner on their acquisition of a Knotty Stalker and explains that in order to use it, a single hair from another person must be inserted into a loop of its string, at which point, the doll will attune to that person. The doll will then come alive, mimicking the actions of the hair's owner in real time, including their speech. The doll will perfectly portray the attuned individual for 9 days, after which point it will become unreliable. The exact way in which SCP-693 begins changing the speech and actions depends on the color of its base string, but in all cases, its end goal is to drive the current owner of the doll to their death. SCP-693 goes about this by feeding inaccurate information to the owner. Dolls made of red string try to send their owner into increasingly violent fits of rage. Dolls comprised of blue string try to depress the owner and lead them to self-harm. Yellow dolls want to make their owners attempt unwanted acts of physical love, and black dolls encourage their owners to engage in activities and place themselves in situations that are dangerous. Interestingly, SCP-693 will attune not just to the living, but to the deceased as well. When a dead person's hair is placed in a loop of string, the Knotty Stalker will come to life, just as it does when a living person's is used. But instead of acting out the speech and movements of the person, the attuned doll will claim to be the deceased person and offer to act as a spiritual guide to the owner. But just like with a living person, at the 9-day mark, SCP-693 will become unreliable and will attempt to lead the owner down a path that results in their death. Once an SCP-693 instance is successful in causing its owner's death, a new doll instance will appear and be found on the owner's body. Several of these dolls have been recovered from Knotty Stalker victims, and currently, the Foundation has 7 red instances, 10 blue instances, 5 yellow instances, and 1 black instance in its possession. All instances of SCP-693 contained by the Foundation were originally classified as safe and kept in Containment Locker 12C-K, but following the events of Incident 693-E, that classification was revisited. During this incident, a researcher returned a Knotty Stalker doll to its Containment Locker, but in a lapse of judgment that went against Foundation protocols, they forgot to remove the hair that had been placed in the doll. When the locker was next opened, the dolls were observed to have all been moved. They were found in a circle around the accidentally still attuned doll, which had been crucified upside down on the wall of the locker. It is unknown where the dolls acquired nails. After this incident, a camera was placed inside of the locker, and the results were surprising, to say the least. It turns out that SCP-693 instances come to life when they are not observed, even when they aren't attuned. While they have not yet been observed engaging in violent acts against each other, the camera has captured the Knotty stalkers appearing to reenact the final 30 minutes of their last owner's life over and over. Following this new information, all instances of Knotty stalker dolls were moved to their own separate 25 by 25 by 25 centimeter steel containers within the containment locker, and their classification was upgraded to Euclid. SCP-693 is one of the rare anomalies where the Foundation actually has quite a good idea as to where it originates, and it was very easy to discover as well. Provided that they aren't a deception, the instructions that appear with each instance of SCP-693 are quite explicit about where they come from. After congratulating the owner on their acquisition and explaining how the doll works, the instructions close by extolling the Knotty Stalker as yet another wonderful product brought to you by the Factory. For those unaware, the Factory is a place with a long connection to the Foundation, though the details on that will have to wait for another file exploration. All you need to know now is that the Factory produces a huge amount of anomalies, and it appears that SCP-693 is one of them. There are theories that the dolls may have been produced as an espionage tool, but as for why their primary purpose seems to be driving their owner to their death, well, that we simply don't know.
It's 1916, right in the middle of World War I, and a British soldier is huddled in a trench, occasionally peeking over the top. He's supposed to be on watch, but there's little to see in the darkness that hangs over no man's land. But then, he spots something big. It's a shadowy figure, only about 20 feet away, and it looks like it's digging in the mud. It's too dark to make out what he's looking at, so the soldier shoots a flare into the sky, lighting up the battlefield with a dull red light. Now he can see it clearly, and it's like nothing he's ever seen before. A huge, terrifying monster, picking up bodies out of the mud. The soldier can only stare, petrified by what he's seeing in front of him, when the creature suddenly turns to stare back at him and smiles. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, and this is SCP-3456, also known as the Orcadian Horsemen. SCP-3456 is the designation given to a group of quadrupeds, of which the exact number that exists is unknown. These entities resemble horses, though with some marked differences. SCP-3456s lack any hair, and their thick skin is translucent, revealing the fat and muscle underneath. They have three-toed hooves, and strangest of all, they have one or more human-shaped torsos fused to their backs. Each torso has a pair of arms and a head, but no legs, the torso seeming to meld directly into the back of the creature's horse-like body. The arms are much longer than those of a human, with a total wingspan that is double the anomaly's height. The arms are so long, they typically drag along the ground when the creature moves. At the end of each arm are 5 sharpened bones that protrude from where fingers would normally be. Instead of a nose, most instances of SCP-3456 have a hole in the middle of the face, which is capable of producing a high-pitched scream that is as loud as a jet engine. SCP-3456 instances vary in size, with the largest recorded manifestation standing 30 meters tall and 15 meters long. Their bodies have also shown to be quite resilient and are completely impervious to conventional weaponry. The anomalous creatures have displayed a high level of adaptive intelligence, using complex tactics like setting up ambushes through the use of property destruction and psychological manipulation to lure targets into traps. This high level of intelligence has led many at the Foundation to believe that SCP-3456 is sapient. Any direct observation of an SCP-3456 instance will cause the entity to become aware of its observer, at which point it will display this awareness by turning in the exact direction of the observer. Once an instance of SCP-3456 has spotted its observer, it will engage in predatory behavior, stalking its witness and pursuing them far beyond the initial site of manifestation, all the while concealing itself and using camouflage as it chases them. SCP-3456 will repeat this behavior over and over, intentionally letting itself be seen by observers over and over as it hunts down and takes each one, until it has captured a large number of individuals and suddenly dematerializes. It's currently unknown where SCP-3456 takes its victims, or what happens to them once it dematerializes. Nor is it known how many victims 3456 needs to capture before it is satisfied and dematerializes for good, as the number taken has varied between instances. It's not currently understood why, but SCP-3456 is either unwilling or unable to cross bodies of fresh water, and making it to the other side of a freshwater source like a river, lake, or even a stream is the only currently known way to escape the anomaly once it begins its pursuit. Instances of SCP-3456 typically appear near sites of mass human suffering, such as battlefields and natural or man-made disasters, and there have been numerous reports and sightings of 3456s at historical events throughout the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries, with multiple manifestations often appearing at the same event. One Foundation report contains an account of an SCP-3456 instance appearing during the First World War at the Battle of the Somme. Rumors spread through the British troops in their trenches of the appearance of a mythical creature many believed to be the Nukkalavi, a horse-like demon with origins in Orcadian mythology. Like many SCPs, this ancient folktale turned out to have very real origins. British infantryman Dave Harkand kept a journal which described giant hoof prints appearing in the battlefield mud, and soldiers disappearing under mysterious circumstances, appearing to be killed by forces even more terrifying than what the war could produce. Harkand describes one soldier who was firing on advancing Germans when the mud beneath his feet started boiling. Before anyone could react, mud went flying everywhere, and everyone was knocked off their feet. The soldier was gone, not even a body part remained, and Harkand was sure he saw bony protrusions reaching up out of the mud underneath the soldier just before he disappeared. Not long after, Harkand spotted the Orcadian Horsemen on the battlefield, and the Horsemen spotted Harkand. He watched as the instance of SCP-3456 picked bodies out of the mud and carried them off into the darkness. He took several shots at the entity with his rifle, but the bullets had no effect. As days passed, the half-man, half-horse continued to appear night after night, always doing the same thing, picking up injured soldiers off the battlefield and taking them into the darkness. It would always look back at Harkand, seemingly taunting him or inviting him to try following it. Soon more instances of SCP-3456 appeared, many with more than one torso on their back. And then they began laying traps, burying themselves in the mud and waiting for the soldiers to rush over them. Dave Harkand was declared missing in action at the Battle of the Somme, and it's presumed he was taken by the same instance of SCP-3456 that he first observed. Another first-hand account of an encounter with SCP-3456 occurred following the 2011 earthquake and subsequent nuclear disaster in Fukushima, Japan. With over 2,500 missing persons, several manifestations of SCP-3456 were reported in the areas affected by the quake, and SCP Foundation reconnaissance teams were sent to investigate, two of which were quickly wiped out during the encounters with 3456s. One squad, after exploring the evacuated city and not finding anything, spotted an instance of SCP-3456 standing motionless in the middle of an intersection. As they laid eyes on the Orcadian Horseman, the human torso that was hanging limp off the motionless horse's body stood upright and began swinging its arms, damaging and destroying the buildings and structures around it. It then turned towards the team and emitted an ear-shatteringly loud shriek from the hole where its nose should be, before beginning its pursuit. The team immediately began evacuation procedures, even ordering a drone strike in an attempt to slow down the chasing anomaly. The team took shelter in an abandoned high-rise building, but knew their only chance of escape was if they could make it over the nearest body of fresh water, which would mean crossing a bridge over the Arakawa River, which was a kilometer away. The team was 50 yards away from the bridge with no further signs of SCP-3456 when one emerged from a side street right next to them. Small arms fire was used against the creature, and 2 rocket-propelled grenades were fired at it, but all had no effect. A flashbang detonated in the anomaly's face bought enough time for some of the squad to make it across the bridge and escape, but 2 members of the team were carried away by SCP-3456
with the last image captured by one of the squad's helmet-mounted cams, being a shot of the Orcadian Horsemen smiling just before it demanifested. SCP-3456 is currently uncontained, and due to its extremely dangerous nature and the lack of any containment procedures, it has been designated Keter Class. Any personnel who observe the entity are to be treated with Class G amnestics, and their assigned treatment facility must be located within 1 kilometer of a body of fresh water. The Foundation has an ongoing project to attribute any historical references to SCP-3456 to myth, shell shock, hysteria, or PTSD, and any reports of loss of life or property damage involving the anomaly are to be replaced with explanations that attribute the cause to other natural or man-made events. Regions where SCP-3456 is more likely to appear are to be closely monitored with personnel ready to assist in evacuation efforts. But above all else, direct observation of SCP-3456 must be avoided, since once that has happened, there's very little even the SCP Foundation can do to protect you.
What was that? The man and woman's hike through a gently rolling portion of the Rocky Mountains has just taken a turn for the dangerous. There's something there in the bush, the man tells her before stepping in front of her in a defensive pose. They watch the bush intently. There's a slight rustling of the leaves as if something is inside. The man picks up a stick from the ground and holds it in front of him, ready to strike whatever fearsome beast is lurking in the underbrush. The rustling stops, but the man doesn't move from his protective stance. "Do you think it's gone?" the woman asks. The man isn't sure. He leans in towards the bush, searching for signs of what might be hiding inside when... Ah! The man screams and falls backwards as the creature emerges from the bush. "Aw!" the woman cries. "It's a pika!" She kneels down to get a closer look at the adorable little creature. Pikas are native to this part of Colorado, and they resemble rabbits but with small, rounded ears. She watches it hop back off the trail before turning around to see her friend lying tangled in the branches of a tree. She can't help but laugh as she offers a hand to help pull him out of his predicament. "Are you all right?" she asks between fits of laughter. Yes, he's fine. The only thing hurt was his pride. He notices a small red spot on his arm and rubs it, but it doesn't seem to hurt at all. His attention is diverted by the woman, though, who is marveling at the tree he was just stuck in. Free of the branches, he can appreciate now that the tree really is incredible. It looks like a huge blue spruce, but the name is a complete misnomer, because this tree is a vibrant red color. "I've never seen anything like it," she says, and the man hasn't either. Neither knows what species it is, and, strangely, there don't seem to be any others like it. Maybe this is the result of an odd genetic defect that turns blue spruces red. After admiring the tree for a moment, the pair decides that they've hiked far enough and that they should probably head back to the car. She jokes that he's likely exhausted from his run-in with a wild animal, and he laughs, but clearly his ego has been bruised. The man stops his car in front of the woman's house, and she thanks him for taking her on the hike. As she starts to get out, though, he stops her. He asks if she wants to go do something else, like dinner? The woman thanks him for his offer, but she has to be up early the next day for work. Just a quick drink then? An hour? 30 minutes? The woman tries her best to let her friend down easy, explaining that she likes him as a friend and as only that. The man opens his mouth to respond, but she stops him. If he valued their friendship, then he wouldn't try to take advantage of it by using it as a backdoor to dating her. The man again looks like his pride has been shattered. He apologizes and admits that she is right. It's just that he has such a good time with her that he never wants it to end. She gives him a sad smile as she closes the car door, and he watches her enter her house before he finally drives away. It's 2 weeks later when the man's phone rings. It's his friend. She explains that she's been thinking a lot about what he said in the car and that she likes spending time with him too. Maybe there could be something more to their relationship. The man can't believe it. Is this really happening? The woman is serious. She'd like to take him up on that dinner offer, if he's still interested. Her treat. She wants to know what he is doing right. Ah! The man suddenly yelps in pain. Is he okay? What was that sound? Yes, I'm fine. It was nothing, the man tells her. It's just that now's not a good time. The woman doesn't understand. She thought he'd want to see her. She explains that she's leaving town for a work trip the next day and will be gone for a couple of weeks. She was hoping she could see him before she left, but the man cries out in pain again. He tells her that he hasn't been feeling well all day, but that he'll be all right. Okay, well, get well soon. I'll call you when I get back. They exchange goodbyes, and the man hangs up the phone. The man looks terrible. His skin is pale, and his face looks hollow and gaunt. He looks down at his arm and sees that the veins themselves appear to be moving, pulsing, and vibrating. He screams again in agony and falls to the floor, clutching his arm. After writhing on the floor, he manages to summon the strength to reach for the phone. His hand searches on the table above him, and eventually he's able to knock it onto the floor. He grabs the phone and starts to dial 911. Before he can press 1 again, another wave of intense searing pain consumes him. Several weeks later, the woman is standing outside the man's house. Mail and newspapers are piled up on his front porch, as if no one has been in or out in some time. She knocks on the door, but there's no response. "Hello?" she calls out, but still nothing. She's very worried. She's tried calling him several times, but he never answered or returned her messages. She tries the doorknob, and to her surprise, the front door swings open. She steps inside and the room is dark. She's also immediately hit by a strong aroma of pine? She searches on the wall and finds the switch. She turns on the lights and can't believe what she sees standing in front of her. There in the middle of the room is a massive spruce tree, its upper branches pressing against the ceiling. She reaches out and touches the tree's vivid red branches. They feel sticky and wet. She pulls her hand away and looks down to see that it's covered in a red substance. That's when she notices something else. Stuck among the trunk at the base of the tree is the half-consumed body of her friend. Unfortunately, this pair would never have the opportunity to see their feelings take root and grow, because unbeknownst to them, this beautiful tree is actually a very deadly anomaly, known to the SCP Foundation as SCP-867, but which is perhaps better known by its very appropriate nickname, Blood Spruce. SCP-867 is, or at least appears to be, quite similar to the species of tree Pisceae pungens, better known as the blue spruce. Of course, there are a number of dramatic differences between 867 and its non-anomalous counterpart. Visually, and most obvious, is the coloration. While blue spruces, as the name implies, are typically a blue-green color, SCP-867 is a deep, vibrant red. There's another major visual difference too, with the blood spruce lacking any sort of seed cones that you would normally expect to find. With no pine cones to protect and spread seeds, you'd be right to ask how SCP-867 goes about reproducing. The answer to that question is what makes this beautiful tree such a dangerous anomaly. The secret to how SCP-867 reproduces is found in its leaves. While they look like pine needles, SCP-867's leaves are, in fact, needles. Their structure is very similar to that of hypodermic needles, and each one contains a single long, thin seed, which sits above a small gas pocket at the base. When a living creature touches the leaves, the tree immediately reacts. It triggers the gas pocket in the base of the leaf to release, which injects the seed into the skin of whatever touched it. The process is quite similar to that found in auto-injectors, like those used to quickly treat allergic reactions. The seed itself is extremely small and is coated in a liquid that has both anesthetic and coagulant properties, which makes the process virtually undetectable. Once implanted in the skin, these seeds can lay dormant for up to 2 weeks before they begin the germination process, and the true horror of SCP-867 is revealed. Once the seeds begin to sprout and grow, they will not seek to penetrate through the skin like a plant rising out of the soil. Instead, the strange plant will grow within its host's body, spreading throughout the circulatory system. This process is extremely painful for the host. The plant's tendrils wind through their veins and capillary system, stretching and pressing against them as the blood spruce grows within them. Eventually, the ever-increasing size of the plant's tendrils becomes too much, and the veins will begin to rupture. This leads to severe internal bleeding, and soon after, the death of the host. The entire process is quite quick, with it only taking 24 hours from when the seeds first sprout to the host dying. But that single day will feel like an eternity to the afflicted individual as they feel the plant rapidly growing inside of their body. But even though the host has expired, this parasitoid tree is far from finished with them, or at least their body. Soon after death, a new instance of the blood spruce will burst from the body. The red tree is quite small at first, but it will continue to quickly grow, just as it did within its host's body, and can reach maturity in just 30 days. And unlike most other plants, SCP-867 is able to grow regardless of light or soil conditions, because it does not produce food via photosynthesis. No, this plant is carnivorous. As it grows, the 867 will slowly consume its host's body until nothing remains except the blood-red tree. Instances of SCP-867 were first identified in Colorado during the 1990s, following reports of numerous disappearances of hikers and park rangers. The SCP Foundation dispatched a team to the area to investigate, and they soon discovered numerous instances of the previously unidentified tree. Several still young specimens were acquired, though unfortunately, this led to the deaths of several agents who were not yet aware of just how dangerous the red spruces could be. Once their threat level was properly assessed, several specimens were flagged for containment and research purposes, while all of the other identified instances still in the wild were destroyed. The remaining instances of SCP-867 were classified as Euclid and are now securely kept at a Foundation biocontainment site. Direct human contact with the plants is normally not allowed, and remote rovers are used for the majority of tests and upkeep. If for any reason it is necessary for a human to enter 867's containment cell, they are to wear full hazmat suits with a Kevlar underlayer, and upon exiting the cell, must undergo a full herbicidal treatment and inspection. Should any possible puncture marks be discovered, they will be forced to quarantine for no less than 15 days. Ah, nature. It's so beautiful, peaceful, and calming, yet seems determined to try and kill us in any number of ways. If you're out hiking or camping in the woods, try to remember this extremely famous adage which I may or may not have just made up. It goes, "Leaves of 3, let them be. Needles of red, well, you're probably already dead." "Tell me if it starts to hurt," the dentist says before reaching into your mouth with a pair of orthodontic pliers and starting to pull your front teeth back into place. Evidently, your screams aren't enough of an indication of the extreme pain you feel because he doesn't stop pulling. After what feels like hours of excruciating oral surgery, you're finally standing outside the dentist's office texting with a friend. "Come on, show me. It can't be that bad," reads the message from your friend. You're nervous to send her a picture, though, since you have a small crush on the girl and you don't want her to see you in this state. But after she asks you again, you decide to take a quick selfie and send it to her anyway. You snap a photo of your mangled mouth and jaw. The mess of wires had to be hastily applied to move your remaining crooked teeth back into place with globs of fast-hardening epoxy, and the result looks like a low-budget horror movie prosthetic. You send the message and wait. You watch the dots appear that indicate she's writing a response, then watch as they disappear without a reply. You sadly slip the phone back into your pocket and begin walking away. As you make your way home with your head hung in shame, you keep your mouth shut tight. You don't want any passers-by to see what you've become. You decide to detour through the park to avoid any people as much as possible, and as you walk, you decide to stop at a picnic table next to a small pond. You sit at the table and watch the ducks mill about in the water. They have it so lucky, you think. Ducks never have to worry about their teeth getting knocked out by a baseball and leaving them looking like a monster. The ducks suddenly all start moving away from your side of the pond, eventually taking flight and leaving completely. You get the sense that they're trying to get away from something, and you turn around, but there's nothing behind you. Oh, it must be me, you think. But then you get the sense that there is something behind you, and turn again. Still though, there's nothing. It's just you, the picnic table, and the empty pond. You turn back to watch the still water, but you can't shake the feeling that there's someone behind you, and turn again. "Hello? Is anyone there?" you ask, but no one answers. You turn back to the pond and you scream in fright at the thing standing before you and fall back off the picnic table. You get up out of the dirt and you don't wait to stick around to see who or what this thing is. You start to run as fast as you can, but you immediately hear it chasing after you. Instinctually, you take out your phone and start trying to take pictures of whatever it is that's behind you. You know no one will ever believe you, and you want some evidence of this thing. You manage to snap off a couple of pictures, but you can hear the creature gaining on you. You scream as your mouth begins to ache. Perhaps running this soon after your surgery is causing your damaged teeth to shift, and the pain is intense. It starts to feel like your mouth is full of jagged rocks, but you can feel that it is your teeth pushing out and stabbing into your mouth. You take one last picture before the creature leaps on you, sending you both to the ground, and your phone tumbling into the dirt. Early the next morning, a police perimeter has been set up in the park. The detective arrives and walks past the traumatized-looking jogger who must have been the one that discovered the grisly scene. An officer guarding the site lifts up the police tape so the detective can enter the crime scene that surrounds a body lying under a white sheet. The detective asks the officer if they've found anything yet, and the officer hands the detective a plastic bag containing a dirty cell phone. The detective puts on a latex glove and removes the phone from the bag. The screen is cracked, but it still works. There's numerous messages on the screen that look like they're from someone trying to apologize for not responding sooner, and asking where the phone's owner is and if they're mad at her. The detective opens the phone's camera app and starts looking at the last photos that were taken. It's a strange series of pictures. They seem to all be selfies that a young man was taking as he ran through the park. It almost appears as though there's a figure behind him, but it's hard to tell. There's a foggy white vignette on the pictures that gets worse the further he looks, slowly closing in until the last photo is nothing but a blurred milky white screen. The detective flips the phone over and looks at the lens, which you can see is completely covered in a hard white substance. The detective places the phone back in the evidence bag and kneels down next to the body. The police officer turns away. He's already seen the victim and doesn't need to again. The detective pulls down the sheet to reveal a truly shocking sight. The boy's mouth is a mess of teeth, far, far too many teeth. There are teeth growing out of every part of his gums at horrible angles, filling his mouth and jutting out at painfully odd angles. Who could have done this? What could have done this? The local police department may not have had any idea what the state of this victim meant, but the SCP Foundation did, because they had seen the same occurrence dozens of times before. In fact, they had seen it happen so many times that they had classified this anomalous entity as SCP-4910, but it had already earned a much more ominous nickname within the Foundation. It was known as the Grinner. Very little is known about SCP-4910, and eyewitness accounts of the creature are all extremely brief due to those who have interacted with it quickly succumbing to its effects. What is known is that SCP-4910 is a quadruped and appears to be made partially, or perhaps entirely, out of teeth. Those who encounter SCP-4910 quickly experience its primary anomalous effect, which is that it causes the extremely rapid overproduction of teeth in its victims' mouths. Existing teeth will quickly increase in size, protruding farther out of the gums than should be able, while new teeth will begin to sprout from any available space in the mouth, including the roof of the mouth and underneath the tongue. These new teeth will completely fill the mouth, which almost immediately inhibits their ability to speak or vocalize at all. The creature will then use this opportunity to attack and incapacitate the victim before starting to feed. Further adding to the mystery of SCP-4910's appearance comes from the effect it has on any nearby recording equipment. Cameras and other devices that come within SCP-4910's proximity will have their critical components compromised by a sudden appearance of a layer of dentin, which is the calcified material that partially makes up teeth. Interestingly, SCP-4910 seems to possess some level of intelligence, as it appears able to differentiate between normal civilians, who it hunts for sustenance, and members of organizations that seek to hunt down and contain or harm it, which it uses for an even more nefarious purpose. While the exact mechanics are still unclear, it seems as though SCP-4910 is able to infect certain anomalous organization members with its ability, causing them to act as a vector for the effect, who then spread it to even more victims. This effect is, of course, of great concern to the Foundation, and containment protocols for infected victims have been hastily put into place. Should a member of staff begin bearing a grin with too many teeth or multiple tooth-filled smiles, they are to be immediately immobilized by any means necessary, though preferably with a firearm that allows one to keep an appropriate distance and hopefully prevent any further spread of the effect. The infected individual is then to be doused in a hydrochloric chemical compound that will reduce the afflicted to a pulp-like substance. Once this pulp is no longer animate, it can be transferred to the closest incineration site for disposal. Should a member of personnel have an interaction with SCP-4910 and feel that they were exposed to its anomalous effects, they may be saved by taking immediate medical action. Oral surgery to remove the additional teeth has been found to be effective when the procedure is undergone in the first 1 to 2 hours following exposure, though the victim will suffer lifelong permanent physical issues from the procedure. Once 3 hours have passed, the effect will have spread to the rest of the body, with teeth appearing virtually anywhere. Unfortunately for the victim, should the infection reach this point, pain management has been shown to be ineffective, and there is nothing that can be done to alleviate their suffering, save for termination. SCP-4910 remains at large and has been given the Keter classification. Mobile Task Force Epsilon, codenamed Turfing Black, is the only MTF authorized to respond to sightings, and they have been given permission to engage the creature and utilize lethal force if necessary, due to the danger this anomaly presents specifically to the SCP Foundation. "Watch this," the teenage boy says before jumping his skateboard up onto the stair railing. His friends watch in amazement as he deftly guides his board down the long rail. They hoot and holler in support until suddenly, the boy seems to lose his balance. He falls from the rail and tumbles down the stairs of the large parking garage where they had been practicing their skateboarding tricks. The boy hits the ground at the end of the stairs, and all of his friends go quiet. The boy is stunned, but eventually he opens his eyes and stands up, but none of his friends can do anything except stare. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," the boy says as he looks down at his arm, which is now bent at a 90-degree angle in a spot where no joint should exist. The children watching all begin to scream, and one, unsure of what else to do, turns and runs. "What do I do? What do I do?" the boy with the broken arm says to no one and everyone. Luckily, one of the group quickly collects herself and steps forward to take control of the situation. "Come on," she says. "We're getting you to the hospital." The girl puts her arm around him on his non-damaged side and helps him to the street, where they have a stroke of good luck. Parked just a block away is an ambulance. "Hey!" the girl cries out, waving towards the ambulance. The paramedics inside must have seen her, because the ambulance's lights immediately come on and it drives the short distance to them. The ambulance stops and two paramedics quickly exit the vehicle. The paramedics don't even need to ask what happened. They can obviously see from the unnatural angle of the boy's arm that he needs immediate medical attention, and they quickly place him into the back of the ambulance. The girl begins to pull herself into the back as well, but is quite forcefully shoved back into the street. "Patients only," is the sole response from the paramedic who pushed her before he slams the door shut. The girl gets a brief look at her friend's frightened face through the back window as the ambulance speeds away. Several days later, the children are sitting outside of the same parking structure, but none of them are in any mood to skate. All they can think about is their missing friend. Neither the boy's parents nor the police have any idea what happened to him or where he went. There's no records at any of the local hospitals of him ever being brought there, nor does there seem to be any evidence of this particular ambulance having existed at all. No one even seems to believe the children that he got into an ambulance. The whole story just seems too far-fetched and outlandish, but the children know what they saw. As they discuss the events for the 100th or perhaps 1,000th time, one of the smallest of the group suddenly stands up and points. "There it is!" The rest of the group looks in the direction he's motioning and sees the same thing. It's the ambulance. None of them know what to do as the vehicle flies past them, this time with no lights on, and comes to a stop a block away from where they first spotted it. They watch as the two paramedics exit the vehicle and go around to the back. It's hard to see from this distance, but it looks as though they took something out of the rear of the ambulance, something that requires both of them to lift, before dropping it on the sidewalk behind some trash cans. The children watch as the paramedics get back into the ambulance and drive away, disappearing just as quickly as they appeared. After a moment of shock, they all in unison begin running to the place where the ambulance stopped. They come to a skidding halt just in front of the trash cans. None of them can do anything except stare until they all break out into screams, one of the children turning and immediately running away. And they have good reason to scream, because in front of them is their friend. His arm is no longer broken, appearing to have been somehow repaired in just a matter of days, but it is also no longer attached to his shoulder. The boy opens his eyes as his friends scream, and looks down to see that his arms and legs have been reattached at a new angle, jutting out from his back, leaving him standing on all fours, his face staring up at the sky like some kind of twisted animal. What happened to this young man was tragic, but he wasn't the first victim of this strange, malicious anomaly, and unfortunately, neither would he be the last, because this was SCP-4419, also known as the Butcher's Chariot. SCP-4419 appears to be a seemingly normal vehicle which resembles a standard ambulance, though the exact make and model varies between manifestations. This anomalous ambulance will appear spontaneously in locations where a medical emergency of some kind is about to take place. Just how SCP-4419 is able to predict where and when these events will take place is unknown, nor is it understood how it always takes the form of an ambulance that resembles one appropriate to the local area. Once the medical event has occurred, whether that be a minor injury like a sprain or something more serious, such as a gunshot wound, SCP-4419 will quickly approach the injured individual. Two individuals which have a humanoid appearance and are dressed in paramedic uniforms that are, just like the ambulance, always appropriate to the location, will exit the ambulance. They will then secure the victim, using a stretcher if need be, and place them in the back of the ambulance. While the individuals who emerge from SCP-4419 will, for the most part, act as though they are normal medical professionals, they will strongly resist any attempt to either impede them in their quest to secure the injured person, as well as prevent anyone else except for their target from getting into the back of the SCP-4419 ambulance, up to and including the use of extreme physical force. As soon as the paramedic-appearing individuals have managed to secure the victim in the back of the ambulance, it will then quickly leave the area at a high rate of speed, and research has shown that as soon as it is out of observation, SCP-4419 will demanifest, along with whoever is inside. But this isn't the end of what this anomaly has in store for its victim. Between 2 and 7 days later, the SCP-4419 ambulance will suddenly reappear at the same area where it picked up its victim. The same individuals will exit the ambulance and leave the victim somewhere nearby before getting back in the vehicle and leaving the scene once again. The victim who is left behind will always have suffered what can only be described as invasive bodily modifications. Their injuries are so extreme that in most cases they should have resulted in the death of the victim, and yet they will always somehow still be alive. While the exact form of modification will vary from victim to victim, there does appear to be some correlation between the original medical emergency and the resulting procedure. And the SCP Foundation has documented a number of encounters with SCP-4419 stretching all the way back to the early 1980s. Some notable examples include one from 1983, in which a pedestrian who was crossing the street was struck by an automobile, resulting in them breaking their leg. SCP-4419 was on site and quickly helped the man into the back of the ambulance. When he was returned several days later, all of his limbs had been reattached in such a way that they were protruding from the front of his torso. In another event which occurred in 1994, a man suffered a broken jaw in a fight outside of a bar. To no surprise, SCP-4419 was on hand and took the man away for treatment. When he was next seen, his jaw had been permanently forced open, and a glass window had been installed in the back of his throat, which permitted direct viewing of his heart, which had also been moved to the back of the throat. Unfortunately, there was no way to reverse this procedure, and the man had to be euthanized. In 2003, a husband and wife were in a car accident where they each sustained multiple broken bones. When SCP-4419 dropped them back off, the two had been fused together at the back, and any bones that were broken in the crash had been removed completely. When an elderly gentleman had a heart attack in 2006, he was picked up by SCP-4419 and returned with 11 new, non-functioning hearts grafted inside of his body. Attempts were made to remove these additional hearts through surgery, but unfortunately, the man did not survive the procedure. In 2008, a structure fire resulted in 19 people suffering extreme burns. 7 more injuries came when a crowd attempted to stop the SCP-4419 paramedics from placing all of the victims in the back of the ambulance, but they were unsuccessful in preventing them from leaving the scene with them. When the group of victims was finally returned, it was as a single organism, a large solitary mass which twitches and shivers when physical contact is applied. No method for euthanizing this organism has been able to be found, and currently they are stored inside of a tank at Site-31. In perhaps the strangest sighting of SCP-4419, a U.S. private was wounded while on patrol in Afghanistan, and a military medical evacuation vehicle arrived to evacuate him. Suspicious about the vehicle's sudden appearance and the forceful conduct of the medical staff, the private's fellow soldiers ended up opening fire on the vehicle. They reported seeing a viscous black fluid leaking from the vehicle's surface, but they were unable to stop it from taking the injured private. In a deviation from its normal behavior, the victim was not returned to the same place, and instead appeared in the barracks the next day. The victim had been broken down into a thin paste and was spread across the walls. Agents were dispatched to secure what was left of the man, and they reported finding a still intact eyeball that dilated when they approached. The collected viscera has been labeled as remains and placed in storage, but it is currently unknown whether or not the victim has truly expired. Due to the danger SCP-4419 presents to anyone who suffers an injury, as well as its ability to appear virtually anywhere on the planet, it has been classified as Keter. Containment efforts at this point are largely focused on maintaining information control and post-manifestation cleanup, as opposed to any attempts at physical confinement. Anyone who witnesses an SCP-4419 manifestation is to be administered amnestics, and victims are to be treated in order to restore them to their original physical state as much as possible, or euthanized when no viable medical treatments are available, with a cover story constructed in order to explain their death. SCP-4419 is one of the most cruel and sadistic anomalies in the SCP Foundation's database, ranking right up there with SCP-106, the Old Man. Hopefully one day we will find a means to contain this brutal so-called medical vehicle, but until then, be careful if you suffer an injury and an ambulance is suddenly on hand. You might come back changed in ways you never thought possible.
A young man steps off the subway into the station. Like many others on their daily commute, he has headphones on and keeps his eyes glued to his phone as he messages his friends, plays mobile games, and watches videos. He takes the escalator up and out of the subway station, paying no mind to the rats that scurry past down the handrail. He steps out onto the street, head still never looking up from his phone. He's made the same trip hundreds, if not thousands of times, each step of his route home so burned into his mind that he could make this journey blindfolded. He turns a corner when, suddenly, he looks up. There's something different. In the split second before everything goes wrong, he realizes what it is. The grate he has stepped onto has just given way. The young man screams as he falls through the loose drainage grate in the sidewalk and is swallowed up into the bowels of the city. He is in the air for only moments before landing with a thud in the darkness below. The air is knocked out of him, but he's immediately aware that he didn't hit the ground as hard as he could have. Something must have broken his fall. It's too dark to see anything, though. He feels around for his phone. It must be around here somewhere. There, he's got it. The screen is cracked, but luckily, it still works. He turns on the flashlight and looks around. He appears to be in some kind of maintenance area below the sidewalk. The room is mostly empty. So what did he land on? He sits up and looks beneath him to find rats. A huge pile of rats. The young man screams and hops up as the rats squeak and scatter. He's in a panic, looking for a way to get out of here as quickly as possible, when he spots something else. There's a pile of dirty clothes in the corner of the room, or at least, he hopes it's a pile of dirty clothes. He slowly steps towards whatever it is. Even after his own harrowing ordeal, he still feels compelled to check it out. If he just found a body, the police will need to know, and he might even get his name in the paper. He can see the headline now. Local man finds missing heiress after heroically plunging into city's depths, inherits her millions for some reason. As he steps closer, he notices a cloud of gnats and flies buzzing around the pile. He slaps at his neck, killing some kind of biting fly. He's standing right next to the pile, but he still can't tell if this is a person or not. "Hello? Are you okay?" the young man asks. No response. He nudges the pile with his foot and jumps back. Did he feel something move? He sticks out his foot and nudges it again. The pile definitely moves this time. A man rolls over, his face covered in bug bites. He's moaning and reaching out, unable to see from his blind eyes that look like they have been gnawed out by rats. He opens his mouth and with one last gasp, appears to die right in front of the young man. The young man can only watch, frozen in fear, as a rat wriggles its way out of his open mouth and stares at the young man. The young man screams, turns, and runs. He doesn't know where he's going as he runs through the dark tunnels, but he finds a set of stairs and follows them up before bursting out of a door into the open air. He slams the door behind him. He's sure the man he saw in the tunnels died, but he's not taking any chances. He runs the rest of the way home, taking the stairs up to his apartment two at a time. He gets into his home and locks and bolts the door behind him. He leans against the door and tries to catch his breath, letting himself slide down to the floor. Finally, safe at last. He slaps at his neck again. Another fly. It must have been in his coat. He takes off his jacket and shirt, shaking them out, and is surprised to see more flies come out, but also other bugs like worms and cockroaches. He keeps shaking, panicking now, as more and more bugs fall from his clothes. He can see in the mirror on the wall that his body is covered in bites, but that's not what really has his attention. He gets close to the mirror, almost in a daze. This can't be right. He must be hallucinating. He looks in the mirror, reaches into his nose, and pulls out a cockroach. Flies crawl out of his mouth as he opens his mouth to scream, while behind him, rats start squeezing in under his door and crawling up his body until he is completely covered in a living, writhing mass of vermin. Many of the anomalies studied by the SCP Foundation are cruel, horrific, and utterly mysterious. And this is one of the rare cases that embodies all three. Because this is SCP-027, also known as the Vermin God. SCP-027 is a phenomenon with strange and frightening properties that seems to affect one human subject at a time. When someone becomes a host to this anomaly,
They will find that they are constantly surrounded by swarms of various types of vermin, parasites, and other pests. The human host has no ability to control or command these creatures, and in fact, the animals will often show aggression towards the host, biting and scratching at them as well as any other person who comes near. It is unknown what causes this effect, but once someone has become a host to SCP-027, the effect appears to be permanent. The swarms of vermin that follow the host do not appear instantly, and instead tend to follow the same pattern of showing up in waves. First, swarms of flying insects, including gnats and flies, will begin to form a cloud around the unlucky individual. Next, non-flying creatures such as lice, cockroaches, worms, spiders, and rats will begin to crawl on the host. The more time that passes, the more of all of these that will appear. Should the host try to leave the location, some of the pests will attempt to cling to them or follow behind, but many of the others will disperse. As soon as the host stops again, though, the process will repeat, and they will once again soon be surrounded by bugs and rodents. While there is no way for a host to rid themselves of the SCP-027 anomaly, the phenomenon has been known to be transferred to a new host, but only following the death of the first. It appears that 027 will continue to jump from host to host, and has likely done this many times in the past. Preliminary research into just how long SCP-027 has existed is ongoing, but early signs point to it having existed for potentially hundreds of years. SCP-027 was first identified by the Foundation when, in the 1990s, a male in his late 30s was found in an abandoned warehouse that was completely overrun with rats and insects. The man was filthy, malnourished, and covered in bites and scratches from a variety of pests. He also showed symptoms of deteriorating mental health, likely caused by a combination of heavy substance abuse and sleep deprivation, neither of which were unexpected, given his horrendous circumstances. The anomalous properties of the subject were quickly recognized by field agents, and he was brought to an SCP Foundation site, where he unfortunately died while still under observation. An autopsy later revealed that over 70% of the man's body at the time of death consisted of a colony of rats that had nested in his abdomen and had been living there long enough to produce at least several generations of offspring. Around 6 days after the man's death, a Foundation security officer at the site where the man had been held reported to medical staff that he was experiencing breathing issues. He told them they began after he had been woken up by what he thought was a housefly crawling up his nose, and he did remember the fly coming back out. Later investigations would reveal that this statement was true, and that the fly laid a clutch of eggs in his sinus cavity as well. The security officer was placed under observation, and following the appearance of more types of vermin, he was classified as SCP-027-02. The man who died was then reclassified as SCP-027-01, and SCP-027 was redefined as an anomalous effect rather than one individual. It is still unknown just how SCP-027 attracts animals, or why it chooses the ones it does to summon to its location. Neither SCP-027-01 or 02 have expressed any communication with any kind of entity or the feeling that one was present, and were unable to provide any additional information on the mysterious qualities of the anomaly. In an interview that took place not long after the security officer was identified as a host and placed into containment, he only described feeling dirty and itchy, like he needed a shower. He was deeply frightened by what was happening, and expressed the desire to rid himself of the anomalous effect as soon as possible so that he could rejoin his family. Research into the anomaly continues, but analysis of the current host has been inconclusive at best. The lack of understanding about just what SCP-027 is, how its anomalous effect functions, and how it jumps to a new host has led the SCP Foundation to classify it as Euclid. The current host for the anomaly is being held in a 5x5 meter cell with a raised grated floor that is connected to a strong vacuum system to trap any vermin that appear. Any creatures that are removed from the cell are to be incinerated, except for a small portion which are sent to research teams for analysis, though so far, all animals have appeared to be completely non-anomalous in nature. SCP-027-02 is to be monitored by at least 2 Foundation personnel at all times, and in the event that the subject exhibits any odd behavior or an unexpected species of animal is discovered in the cell, it is to be reported to a Level 4 personnel immediately. Security personnel assigned to 027 duty are to be vaccinated against all possible animal-borne diseases and have permission to subdue the subject with tranquilizers should the need arise. Should the subject appear to be experiencing a serious medical event, All high-value personnel should be moved far away from the current host to lower the chance of them becoming a host to the anomaly. And no personnel of Level 4 clearance or higher should approach within 200 meters of the subject at all until SCP-027 and its strange properties are better understood. A man wakes up with a start. Did something just bite him? He looks down at his hand. Something definitely bit him. He can see the red welt already forming. He looks around for the culprit, but can't find it anywhere. He really hopes he doesn't have bed bugs. That's the last thing he needs right now. He'll have to keep his eyes open for potential pests. He doesn't want this to happen again, since the spot is already starting to itch and feel uncomfortable. A couple days pass, though, with no signs of other bugs. It must have just been a random insect that came inside his house to escape the winter cold. The spot on his hand felt a little rough for a day or two, but now he's pretty much forgotten all about it. Now what he really needs is some coffee before sitting down to another coding session. The man is in his kitchen trying to make a fresh pot of coffee, but finds he's having a hard time. He's not so much making coffee as he is making a mess. He knocks his favorite mug onto the ground, breaking it, and decides that maybe he doesn't need coffee after all. A couple of nights later, as the man is watching TV, he starts to cough. Just a little at first, but then more and more. The coughing fits get longer and deeper too, like they are coming from the very bottom of his lungs. He hopes he isn't coming down with something. He hasn't left the house in days, so how could he have? Can bugs transfer colds? He'll have to look it up later. For now, he needs to do something about this cough. He won't be able to sleep if it keeps up. He needs to go get some medicine. The man gets bundled up and heads out. It's lightly snowing as he walks to the pharmacy, and he can't help but admire the way the moon hangs in the sky, a beautiful beacon of light on this dark winter evening. Inside the pharmacy, he finds the cold medicine section and picks out a cough suppressant. He takes it to the counter and decides to get a few candy bars too. He's developed a real sweet tooth these last few days. The man starts to cough again. It's a good thing he's getting this medicine. Several more days pass, and the man isn't feeling any better. This cough just won't go away. He decides it's finally time to go see a doctor. As he sits in the doctor's office waiting room, he does his best to hold in his coughs, but he has a very hard time. The woman on the other side of the room is coughing too. Strangely, it actually makes him feel a little better. There must just be something going around. A nurse comes into the waiting room and calls his name. The doctor is ready for him. The man is sitting on the bed in the examination room when the doctor enters. He's looking over his medical records and doesn't even look up from his clipboard. He tells the man to take off his shirt so that he can be examined, and the man obliges. "Okay, let's see what the trouble is," the doctor says. He finally looks up at the man and screams. It didn't take long for the SCP Foundation to hear the reports of people's limbs metamorphosing into insectoid appendages, and they knew immediately what they were dealing with. This was another outbreak of the parasitic, limb-transforming insect known as SCP-150. SCP-150 is an obligate parasite, meaning that it requires a host for the completion of its reproductive life cycle. It bears a visual appearance similar to that of Cymathoa exigua, another parasite that eats the tongue of a particular type of fish before replacing the tongue with its own body. SCP-150 engages in similar behavior, though it appears to exclusively affect humans. When a human comes in contact with the small bug-like organism, it will embed itself under its new host's skin. Next, over the course of roughly 7 days, SCP-150 will burrow deep into the host's flesh and begin to cause numerous physiological changes to them. First, and most prominently, SCP-150 will begin a gradual process of altering the limb that is nearest to the original infection site. As SCP-150 burrows deeper and consumes the flesh, it excretes a substance that has the effect of replacing the missing sections of the limb with a hard, chitinous material that resembles one of its own appendages. Beneath the chitin, the excreted substance forms a rudimentary nervous system that gives the host the ability to control the new limb as if it were their own. As it feeds, SCP-150 also secretes several chemicals that contain anesthetic, immunosuppressant, and transplant-rejecting properties that keep the host's body from responding to the changes, or even reacting at all. In fact, the host will often report that their new limb is completely normal and feels stronger and more resilient after the transformation.
SCP-150 will continue to feed for approximately 1 to 2 weeks, and as it feeds on the nutrients within its host's body, it will begin to reproduce, creating eggs that it deposits directly into the bloodstream. While the majority of these eggs will die off, enough usually survive to begin colonizing other parts of the host's body, where they will hatch and repeat the process of feeding, reproducing, and spreading more eggs. It is theorized that it is capable of reproducing on its own, meaning that a single instance of SCP-150 is all it takes to create a new colony. Humans infected with SCP-150 will sometimes report slight discomfort and issues with their fine motor skills during this period, but will usually not express any knowledge of what might be causing this. Eventually, SCP-150 eggs will reach the host's lungs, where the process of assimilating continues, this time replacing the lungs themselves. During this process, more eggs will be produced, laid, and then spread out of the body by the host's coughing. As many as 10,000 eggs will be produced during this period, approximately 1% of which will survive being expelled, find another host, and implant themselves. The assimilation process then spreads to the central nervous system, including the spinal cord and brain, but strangely, the host will show no signs that their consciousness or behavior have been affected in any way. In interviews with hosts of SCP-150, those who are unaware that they are infected have not expressed any knowledge of changes happening in or out of their body. When subjects are made aware that they have been infected, they will be able to point out the site of the original infection and agree that a change has taken place, but they seem to have no ill will towards their new chitinous appendages and will often express positive feelings about it. In order to better study the effects of SCP-150 under SCP Foundation control, 2 D-Class personnel, D-13732 and D-016002, were both infected with the parasites, and the assimilation process was allowed to fully progress through all the stages. Following signs that D-016002 was experiencing swelling of the brain, a decompressive craniotomy was performed, a procedure in which a portion of the skull is removed in order to relieve pressure on the brain. This surgery had the added benefit of giving Foundation researchers the chance to look at SCP-150's progress firsthand. But after a flap of her skull was removed, the attending scientists did not find that her brain was swelling. They didn't find her brain at all, but instead observed numerous instances of SCP-150 in the cavity where her brain should be. The D-Class had been partially anesthetized to numb her skull but remained conscious during the procedure, and the scientists asked her several simple questions to which she was perfectly able to answer. They began removing some of the parasites, and as they did so, her answers became slower and less clear. It appeared that the SCP-150 instances had not just eaten and replaced her brain, they had become her brain. For the next experiment, they would use the instances of SCP-150 that had been removed from D-13732's nervous system after he had been euthanized following the discovery that his entire nervous system had also been replaced entirely by SCP-150. The parasites taken from his brain cavity were placed into D-016002's, and the results were nothing short of incredible. After observing a period of time where the organisms appeared to move and rearrange themselves within her skull, she regained consciousness. Once awake, not only did her cognitive functions immediately improve, when she was asked to state her name, she told them it was Michael, D-13732's name. It is unknown why SCP-150 engages in this peculiar life cycle, but the danger it poses to humans and the difficulty in keeping it contained has led the SCP Foundation to classify it as Keter. Some of the more erudite researchers have taken to calling the parasite the ship of Theseus, a play on the philosophical notion that questions whether something that has had all of its parts replaced is still fundamentally the same, or if it has become something new. Perhaps the observation of those infected with SCP-150 can shed some light on this millennia-old question. Infected patients who are being studied are to be kept in Level 3 biohazard containment cells, with never more than 1 infected host per cell. Cultures of SCP-150 adults and eggs are kept in vacuum-sealed glass flasks in the Site-42 Infectious Materials Lab, and the Foundation's standard pathogen handling procedures are required to be followed at all times. Should any instance of SCP-150 be found outside of containment, it is to be immediately incinerated.
A storm rages outside of the little old house, as inside, a little old woman bounces a little baby on her little old knee. The baby coos and laughs as the old woman makes funny faces and noises for the child, trying to keep it entertained as they wait for his parents to return from their much-needed night out by themselves. The old woman herself needs a rest now, though. She's forgotten how exhausting it can be to watch a child. "Okay, that's enough. It's time for both of us to take a little nap before your parents get back." She gets up and takes the baby into a nearby room that looks as though it was a nursery at one time, but it hasn't been used for many years. As she goes to set the child into the crib, a strong gust of wind blows through the room. She places the baby down and rushes to the window and closes it shut. It must have been left cracked open by mistake. Brr, the room is cold from the wind, but she has just the thing to fix that. She moves to a small closet and opens the creaky door. The little old woman strains to reach up to the top shelf and feels around. Ah, there it is. She pulls down a baby blanket, a soft baby blue with colorful animals printed on it. It looks as though it's been up there for a long time, and she gives it a good shake before walking back to the crib. "Look what we have here. It's your daddy's own blankie." She gives it another shake. "There we go, good as new." She leans into the crib and wraps the small helpless child in the blanket before giving him a gentle kiss on the forehead. "Now you get some sleep. Your mommy and daddy will be back before you know it, and we want to show them what a good babysitter Grammy is, don't we? That way I get to see you all the time." The little old woman switches off the light and exits the room, leaving the door cracked just a few inches. She heads back to the couch and plops down on it. Almost as soon as she does, though, the baby starts crying. With a sigh, she gets back up and goes back to the nursery. "What's the matter, little dear?" she says as she turns the lights on. "Oh no," she rushes to the crib. "You've kicked your blanket off. You must be freezing." She grabs the blanket from the end of the crib and tucks it around the baby once again. "There you go, that's better." The old woman leaves the room and quietly closes the door shut, leaving it open just a few inches. The moment she turns around to go back to the couch, though, the crying starts again. With a sigh, she opens the door and goes back into the room. Once again, the blanket is stuffed at the end of the crib where the baby has kicked it off. "Fine, don't want a blanket? That's fine." She picks the baby up out of the crib and rocks him in her arms until it stops crying. She sets him back in the crib. "There you go. No blankets, just please get some sleep. Grammy's tired." The old woman takes the blanket out of the crib and leaves the room. She closes the door most of the way and, incredibly, this time the child remains silent. The old woman resumes her place on the couch and starts to yawn. Just as she does, the wind outside picks up and howls loudly. The old woman shivers. She looks next to her and spots the baby blanket. She picks it up and examines the cute animal print, remembering when her own son was a baby wrapped in it. She smiles at the happy thought and throws the blanket around her shoulders. She leans back on the couch and finds that her eyes are growing very heavy. She'll rest them for just a moment. She won't fall asleep. She'll just rest. "Mom, it's us. We're back. Thanks again for..." The couple both scream when they enter the house to find that the old woman is lying face down on the floor in a pool of blood. The source of the blood is obvious. Chunks of flesh from her shoulders and upper back have been torn out, leaving jagged holes, as if she were mauled by an animal. As the man runs to the old woman, trying to do anything he can to help her, the woman runs to the nursery to find that the baby is sleeping peacefully in his crib. The woman picks up the child, tears streaming down her cheeks, and returns to the living room to see her husband kneeling beside his dead mother. Both the husband and wife are so shocked by what they have found that neither notices the baby blanket lying on the couch, or that the cruel, blood-covered mouth on it is slowly fading from view until it disappears completely. There is little in life that is more comforting than a favorite blanket. Perhaps you've had the same one since you were a child, or you have a heavy one that you like to wrap yourself in when you're feeling down, or maybe it's just one that's especially fluffy and warm that you'd do anything to keep. Today's anomaly plays on those very feelings, using them against its victims to become one of the more insidious predatory anomalies in the SCP Foundation archives. This is SCP-799, also known as the Carnivorous Blanket. SCP-799 is a type of creature that can vary in shape, size, and appearance, but, as the name implies, always takes the form of a blanket of some kind. The exact material the anomaly is made out of is unknown, but it is a very soft fiber that in many ways resembles a high-quality merino wool blend, though one that retains heat even more effectively than its natural counterpart. SCP-799's weight can vary from between half a kilogram all the way to 6 kilograms. and while examples have been found in nearly every color imaginable, it seems predisposed towards pastels and will frequently have patterns featuring stylized, friendly depictions of various animals. Both the pastel colors and the childish patterns are especially common in instances of SCP-799 that weigh less than 2 kilograms and would colloquially be known as baby blankets. While SCP-799 is undoubtedly a living organism, there is some debate as to whether it is itself an animal or perhaps a type of fungal colony. Instances of 799 are incapable of locomotion, lying motionless for long periods of time, and require little in the way of nutrition. What small amount they do need, they appear to be able to gain almost entirely from the organic particles present in normal household dust, such as animal dander and dead human skin cells. The blanket feeds via a series of minute, filter-feeding mouth-like structures that are spread across the surface of the creature, which wait for nutrients to fall into them, not unlike a sponge on the ocean floor. Instances of SCP-799 can survive for quite a while in this state, and one specimen was noted as having lived for multiple years in a damp attic, subsisting entirely on the small organic particles that would drift down from the rafters above. Should an instance of SCP-799 be forced to go for long periods of time without a source of nutrition, though, like when, for example, it is placed inside of a sealed closet or drawer, it will begin to undergo certain physical changes, which result in it metamorphosing into its predatory form. These changes aren't noticeable from only casual observation and consist of the blanket converting its many filter-feeding mouths into a single, large one that is lined with multiple rows of extremely sharp teeth. The blanket creature also develops a new form of tissue inside its cloth-like structure, one that is similar to muscle and capable of contracting and squeezing. Once its metamorphosis is complete, the instance of SCP-799 will lie in wait for an unsuspecting creature to cover themselves with it or wrap it around their body. Once they do, the blanket will bide its time until they enter a state of rest, usually waiting for them to fall asleep entirely, at which point its feeding phase will begin. Once the creature has detected that its victim is dormant, it will use its newly formed muscle to latch onto them, holding them in place as it opens its tooth-lined maw. It will begin to bite at its confined prey, tearing off several kilograms of flesh, bone, and any other organic material it can, swallowing it, and converting it into a thin slurry that it spreads through its body almost immediately. This traumatic, violent process nearly always leads to the victim dying of blood loss. Within 10 minutes of the attack, the mouth on SCP-799 will have been completely reabsorbed, leaving no signs that it is anything other than a normal, everyday blanket, though one which now mysteriously weighs several kilograms more than it did before. By 40 minutes after the attack, the entire digestive system within SCP-799 will have demetamorphosed back into its original form, with a single digestive tract being changed once again to the many dispersed filter-feeding mouths. While SCP-799 is more than happy to feed on any warm-blooded animal, including humans, it shows no interest in cold-blooded ones or inanimate objects. It appears then that its senses may be limited to only touch and heat, using those as signs that it is now wrapped around a potential meal. Adding to the strangeness of SCP-799 is that it reproduces through budding, like flatworms and corals. When it has absorbed enough nutrients and sufficiently increased its mass, either very slowly through filter feeding or rapidly via its carnivorous phase, it will begin to take on a quilt-like appearance. Over several weeks, one of the quilt squares will puff up and slide off the blanket. This new, smaller instance will resemble a doily or a throw pillow, until it too begins to feed and grow. The new instance is a perfect clone of its parent, identical in every way, and it will eventually grow to a similar size and begin its own reproductive cycle. It is unknown exactly how long it takes SCP-799 to reach full maturity, but the current best guess is that when kept in its filter-feeding phase, an instance will reproduce every 50 to 60 years. Instances of SCP-799 are quite prevalent across the planet, and the SCP Foundation currently has hundreds of examples in containment. Unfortunately, it is unknown just how many still exist in the wild, as it is very difficult to identify instances, with one of the only reliable means being through genetic testing. Should any instances be located, though, they are to be destroyed immediately, as the Foundation already has a large enough population in containment for research purposes, and they pose too much of a risk both in terms of harm and exposure to the general public. SCP-799 has been classified as Euclid, and each instance is kept in its own separate biocontainment cell at Biosite 66. Dust is regularly collected from the on-site D-Class personnel dorms and is sprinkled over the blankets regularly to keep them in their filter-feeding state, though only just enough to hopefully maintain their size and not allow them to reproduce. Should any small cloth objects appear in their containment lockers, it is to be removed immediately and contained separately. SCP-799 isn't the only predatory creature that resembles a cloth good in Foundation containment, and research into possible connections to SCP-1626, the oversized gray hooded sweatshirt that sends penetrating fibers into anyone unlucky enough to put it on, is ongoing. 23. Bust, the dealer says before scooping up the cards from in front of the man who appears to be growing increasingly angry as his stack of chips increasingly dwindles in size. Making matters worse for the man are the cheers of excitement coming from the nearby craps table, where it seems all of the luck that he has lost has somehow been transported. As the blackjack dealer once again reveals an ace and a king, another burst of noise comes from the craps game. 7 again, the croupier cries before placing a huge stack of chips in front of the young man playing craps who seemingly can't lose. The young man on the hot streak collects his winnings and walks happily through the crowded casino floor, right past the fuming man at the blackjack table. The young man cashes in his chips and counts the large stack of $100 bills given to him before tipping one to the woman working inside the cage. And this night is far from a rarity for this young man. For his entire life, it's been as if he couldn't lose. He's not strong, fast, or especially smart, but he's always managed to excel thanks to his one incredible gift: his never-ending good luck. The young man soon recognized his ability to consistently beat games of chance and went to the one place in the world best suited for his skills: Las Vegas. And Vegas has been very, very good to him. He lives in an expensive hotel room right on the Strip, drives fancy cars, and treats himself nightly to lavish dinners and shows. It's all possible because no matter what the game is, it's as if he can never lose. The young man is in the middle of another hot streak, or rather, continuing his never-ending hot streak, this time at the roulette table. How does he keep doing it? Someone in the crowd asks as the man hits another number straight up, paying out 37 to 1 on his bet. The crowd cheers and slaps the man on his back, as a crowd is formed who are following along with his every bet, piggybacking on his luck as much as they can. The man is just about to place another large bet when he's suddenly interrupted by a strong hand gripping his upper arm. The young man turns to find a large, toothy grin staring back at him. The smiling man continues to hold on to the young man's arm as he explains how impressed the casino is with his skill. He must be the luckiest man they've ever had the pleasure to have visited their casino, and the fact that he's been able to sustain that same run of luck night after night has been truly awe-inspiring. The young man thanks him for his kind words and tries to turn back to the table, but finds that the man won't let go of his arm, gripping it even tighter now than before. "We've been so impressed, in fact," the man tells him, "that the owners of this casino have requested the chance to meet with you." The young man looks down at the huge, powerful hand holding his arm, and even though he's unaware that it belongs to a former heavyweight contender, he's still able to recognize that this request isn't an optional one. "Sure," the young man tells him. "Just let me grab my chips and—" But the man begins to pull him away from the table, telling him that there's no need to worry. The casino will take care of his winnings. "After all, we have cameras everywhere. Who would steal?" The young man is soon pushed through a doorway into a space that looks like a police interrogation room, with just a single table and a couple of chairs, one of which a small, older man is sitting in. The ex-boxer wrenches the young man's arm down onto the table and holds it in place there. The young man screams as the boxer grabs a hammer with his free hand and raises it into the air, ready to bring it down on the young man's fingers. "Well?" the old man sitting across from him asks. The young man has started to cry a little, but between whimpers he manages to ask, "Well, what?" The old man wants to know how the young man is cheating. No one wins the way he does, over and over, night after night, no matter the game. The young man insists that he isn't cheating, he's just lucky. He always has been, but the old man isn't buying it. He nods to the boxer, who raises the hammer up again, but still the young man doesn't admit to anything. I'm just lucky, he keeps repeating over and over in between sobs. The old man stands up and pats him on the shoulder. "Maybe you are," he says, before slipping something into the man's pocket. The police then enter the room and immediately take a set of loaded dice from the same pocket. He's in real trouble now. The young man is shoved into a holding cell at the jail and looks around at the other men, wondering if his luck has finally run out. He squeezes in on one of the benches lining the wall and accidentally bumps the man sitting next to him, waking him up from his nap. The man is angry at having been disturbed, but grows even angrier when he realizes who just woke him. It's the man who seemed to take all the luck. The young man doesn't seem to have noticed that he's upset at him at all, though. What he has noticed is that there's a penny on the floor in front of him. The young man bends to pick it up just as the man next to him throws a haymaker. His fist slams into the wall right where the young man's head just was, shattering many of the bones in his hand. The young man jumps up with a fright and runs across the small cell as the other men being held also leap to their feet, some crying out in confusion, others cheering on the violence. The young man cries out to the guards for help, but no one seems to be coming to his aid. He looks around the cell, but there's nowhere for him to hide. The angry man, now madder than ever with a hand that is rapidly turning purple and blue, approaches him. He lifts the young man up with his good hand, holding him in the air by his throat. "I'm gonna kill you," the man cries before the door to the cell opens. The young man watches as the taser prongs fired by the jail guards appear on the man's chest, and he drops the young man to the floor before falling backwards from the 50,000 volts coursing through his body. The young man would learn the next day that the angry man was dead before he even hit the floor, the result of a congenital heart defect and a lot of bad luck. The young man stands before a judge who is listing off the charges against him, which include cheating, a felony in this state that can result in a sentence of up to 5 years in prison. "But this isn't your first offense, is it?" the judge asks. The young man tries to explain that those previous times were all mistakes. He's never cheated in his life, but the judge doesn't want to hear it. The young man is sitting in the hallway outside the courtroom when his lawyer emerges from his meeting with the judge and prosecutor. "Boy, are you a lucky guy," his lawyer tells him. He goes on to explain that even though the case against him is airtight, the charges are going to be dropped, provided he admits himself to a special program. The young man assumes it must be some kind of gambling addiction program. In no way is he addicted to gambling, but what choice does he have? It's either that or prison. The choice is easy. As the young man exits the courthouse, he is approached by a man in a suit who leads him to a black van parked nearby. The young man is placed in the back and immediately notices that there is a cage separating the back from the front seat, like a prison transport van. The young man is growing nervous. Where are they taking him? This all seems like it's happening so fast. Can it even be legal? And what about his things that were taken at the jail? "Excuse me," he asks the driver. "What about my things? I don't even have my wallet." "Don't worry about that," the man driving the van tells him. "You won't need any of that anymore. You're D-class now." The man doesn't have any idea what that means, but he can tell it isn't good. His luck may have finally ran out. The young man, who once lived the life of a professional Las Vegas gambler, was given a new name, D87465. But as you'll see, that name wouldn't last very long, and soon would be known as SCP-181, or as the SCP Foundation staff like to refer to him, Lucky. SCP-181 was first noticed by the Foundation following his being arrested for repeatedly defrauding the Nevada Gaming Commission. He was originally made a member of the Foundation's Class D personnel, the guinea pigs of the SCP Foundation who are used for various tests with anomalies in order to better understand their properties. However, it soon became clear that the man's ability to consistently beat the odds had nothing to do with cheating. In his first experiment, which took place at Armed Reliquary Containment Area 02, where he and several other Class Ds were exposed to an SCP that is known to incite extreme anger and murderous tendencies in those who come into contact with it. Just as expected, one of the other D-Class members became enraged and began rampaging, killing all of the other Class Ds present, all except for one. Through what appeared to be a stroke of good luck, the frenzying D-Class seemed to miss D87465, who had laid down on the ground amongst the other bodies and was playing dead. An armed response team soon entered the experimentation cell and put down the rampaging D-Class, sparing D87465. He was next submitted to a test with SCP-075, a creature that resembles a large snail with a muscular foot shaped like a six-fingered clawed hand. SCP-075 is much heavier than its small size makes it seem like it should, weighing approximately 860 kilograms. Despite this, it is able to move at an extremely high speed, quickly leaping towards anyone who comes near it and spraying them with a deadly corrosive liquid. D87465 was placed in a cell with SCP-075 as part of a test to measure its speed and reaction time. But despite SCP-075 having immediately killed all other prior D-classes during tests, D87465 somehow managed to keep avoiding its leaping attacks. He was always able to guess which direction to move in order to dodge the deadly snail, like a soccer goalie who always picks the right way to dive to stop penalty kicks. Having now survived not one, but two experiments that exposed him to Keter-class anomalies, researchers needed to find out if D87465 was himself anomalous or simply a statistical anomaly. In order to test this, the D-Class was placed in the containment cell of SCP-082, better known to most as Fernand the Cannibal, a grotesquely huge humanoid with ogre-like features, who often dresses like a Victorian-era aristocrat and will regale his guests with outlandish stories before inevitably eating them. But there was something different about D-87465. After a full month of survival in 082's cell, a length of time that had resulted in all the previous test subjects being consumed, SCP researchers suspected that this D-class's incredible ability to survive was much more than dumb luck. But they needed to test him even more to see if his powers extended beyond just the ability to survive. D-87465 was removed from regular D-class duties, and researchers began performing various tests on him, watching as he flipped a coin 50 times in a row, with it coming up heads every single time. Similar results occurred when they had him roll pairs of dice that would always total up to 7, or when they had him pick random cards out of a deck, and he was able to pull all 13 hearts in a row. Foundation researchers were now convinced that this man was more than just lucky. He seemed to possess the ability to create an unnatural effect on probability, though researchers suspected that he was generating this effect without being aware of it. At this point, D-87465 was reclassified and given a new designation, SCP-181. Further testing confirmed that SCP-181 is able to affect causal probability and that it really does occur through no action of his own. However, there's more to SCP-181 than simply being lucky, as researchers soon found out. In an audit of death and injury rates at Bioresearch Area 12, where SCP-181 is contained, it was discovered that both had increased dramatically in the time since he was brought there. It seems that SCP-181 doesn't simply create his own good luck. He, in some ways, saps it from others simply by being present. It now appears that every lucky moment he experiences results in the opposite happening to someone else. For every 7 he rolls on a pair of dice, someone else gets snake eyes. And for every death-defying escape he makes, someone else must die. There's no telling how far his ability might scale. Could he survive a nuclear blast? And if he did, what would be the result in order to even out the odds, so to speak? In light of these new discoveries, SCP-181 was removed from his low-level containment cell where he was allowed to occasionally interact with D-Class personnel for entertainment purposes, and was moved to Site-27, where he was placed in solitary confinement and classified as safe. All interactions with staff are now limited to the bare minimum in order to ensure his survival and security, without risking any events that might result in him getting lucky. London's never really quiet. Even in the dead of night, there are still taxis driving, drunks shouting, and arguments echoing from top-floor windows. Cleaners and airport staff trudge through the darkened streets on their way to work, not looking up at the bar staff and security guards plodding home. It's probably better that it never gets really quiet, though. As much as the thief would like to be able to hear the footsteps of someone else coming his way, it's probably best that the noises out on the street mask his own. His theory is proven correct almost immediately as he jumps from the overpass down onto the construction site. He makes it over the barbed wire fence, but loses his footing on the landing and falls against a porta potty. The plastic wall splits, and he clatters through into the toilet. Sticking out a hand, he manages to stop himself. You'll never guess where his hand landed. Wonderful. For a moment, he slumps there, grumbling to himself, praying no one hurt him. But outside, there's just the regular hum of London's nightlife. He's safe for now. He straightens up, opens the door of the porta potty, and steps out. He has to crane his neck back to look up at the structure in front of him. He's at the base of a block of flats, or at least what would have been a block of flats. He'd asked the chicken shop owner from across the street about this place earlier in the day. The man told him it was supposed to be a new development to attract young 20-something professionals to the area, but midway through construction, the company shut down. Now the shell of the building stands empty, waiting to be knocked back down. With any luck, there might still be some building equipment around here that he can salvage, or maybe a bit of copper wiring he can sell. At the very least, it'll put a roof over his head for a few nights. He's even got a toilet. Kind of. He'll scope the place out and call his wife in a bit. After a long day working the market stalls, she deserves her night in the soup kitchen tonight. That place had stopped letting him in after the last fight. The pair of them aren't exactly homeless. They just don't have a home right now. The thief sidles into the building, peering around in the gloom. Exposed concrete and girders surround him in every direction. There aren't many walls in place yet, just floors and ceiling, broken up by staircases and supporting pillars. It'll be quite exposed down here. He needs to head up higher to see if there are any more secluded spots for the night. As he climbs up the stairs, The thief hears voices above him echoing through the empty shell of a building. He peeks over the top of the stairs. This floor is a bit more divided up. There are a few walls in place. He sees the light of what must be a fire dancing around the edge of one of them. That's where the voices are coming from. Security guards wouldn't light a fire. They must be homeless. Ugh, the thief hates homeless people. Being surrounded by them so much at the moment is just demeaning. They have no morals, no standards, they just lie and steal. He spies a couple of backpacks leaning against the wall. He'll have to be quiet, but with a bit of luck, he can sneak over and take one of those packs without any of them hearing. He creeps up to the top of the stairs, and a piece of metal glints at him in the dark. A sledgehammer, lying there on the ground. He tiptoes over to it and lifts it into his arms. It's heavy. If he can give it a good swing, it'll keep him safe for sure. He grins and makes his way towards the packs on the ground. He gently loops a hand under the shoulder strap. 3, 2, 1. Clatter! An empty can falls out of the side and bounces off the concrete floor. What was that? Oh no. The thief shoulders the pack and runs, but it's too late. A pair of hands grab him and spin him around. The thief staggers backward but stays on his feet. 3 figures surround him in the dark. He doesn't have a choice. He swings the sledgehammer wildly. It takes all of his strength just to lift it, but sure enough, he feels it connect. He swings it back the other way, hard as he can. His arms strain from the effort. A man yelps in the darkness. Something heavy thuds to the floor. For a moment, all 4 of them stand there in silence. The thief holds the sledgehammer at the ready. He isn't sure if he's got the strength to swing it again, even with all this adrenaline. But the other men aren't looking at him. The 2 on either side stare at the man in the middle. Or rather, what used to be the man in the middle. The man's friends bolt for the exit. They run off into the night without a look back. Neither will ever be able to explain what they saw tonight. It takes a long time for the thief's hands to warm up by the fire. They feel cold and don't stop trembling for a long time. So long that the sun is about to come up. There's something red on the thief's hands. He can just about make it out in the flickering light. Must be blood. He wipes it on the ground and reaches into his pocket, fishing out the little brick phone. He's only got 5% battery left and almost no minutes on the sim. No time to explain the details. He just calls his wife, gives her the location, and tells her to come quick. She'll need to jump from the overpass soon before there are too many commuters on the rails. He's moved the body, of course. He's sitting next to it right now, actually. Couldn't leave it out in the open for anyone to see. In this little nook with the fire, he's well hidden from the outside world. There's graffiti on the walls. This must be a popular spot. If anyone comes and disturbs him, he knows what he's doing with them. The sledgehammer leans against his leg. After about an hour, he hears footsteps on the concrete behind him. He whistles once. 2 whistles come back. His wife stops dead when she rounds the corner. He hadn't told her what had happened over the phone, just that he'd found them a new spot. She's staring at the body lying next to him. Rose petals and candles usually work better. He shrugs and looks back at the flames. Not his fault. Self-defense, as always. But she doesn't stop staring. It's starting to annoy him now. It's like she's never seen a body. What's wrong with her? Can't she? Then he hears it. Soft, rasping breathing. Very slowly, the thief turns his head. Lying there on the ground next to him, with half of his head caved in, the man is still alive, staring at them both through one horrified eye. The thief grasps the sledgehammer and stands up. That just makes no sense. His wife looks puzzled too. They look at the man lying on the ground in more detail. A chunk of his head is missing completely, but the wound underneath is healed over. The flesh and brain underneath looks like it's been cauterized, as if he'd been burned. And surely you can't still be alive with that big of a chunk of your brain missing. Strange, his wife mumbles. Her hand joins his on the hilt of the sledgehammer. She takes it from him and caves in the homeless man's head. In just a few swings, his head is a red, mushy pulp on the floor. Definitely dead now. They both stare at the body for a bit. No more breathing. Lovely. Problem solved. But the red mush doesn't look like blood. Incredulously, his wife extends a finger and dips it into the red mush on the homeless man's head. She raises it to her mouth and has a taste. Salsa. 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 He doesn't believe her. He leans down to take a nibble of the red mush on the ground. Sure enough, the cool taste of pico de gallo meets his tongue. It's not bad, you know. Ignoring the sweaty grime of the homeless man's flesh, it's actually pretty good. The thief looks over at his wife. She scoops 2 fingers through the goop and sticks it in her mouth. A grin spreads across her face, a glint lighting up her eye. He's been married to her long enough to know what this face means. She's got a plan. Finding the jars proves to be the biggest issue, or at least finding intact jars. Dumpster diving has never been the thief's favorite pastime. Feels a bit too homeless for him. But as he climbs out of his 12th bin of the day with nothing to show for his efforts but a measly little glass jar, he thinks he's had enough. He tosses a rotten potato at his wife. It splatters in her hair. It would probably stink anywhere, but amongst all this trash, the potato is probably the best-smelling thing around. "You throw one more bit of trash at me, and I'll be dipping tortillas in what's left of you," she says. The thief's had enough. He clambers out of the dumpster and storms over to his wife. This plan sucks. Why does he have to be the one covered in trash all the time? Why is he the one always breaking into construction sites? He raises a fist above his head, just as she spots the jar in his hand and squeals in excitement. She pecks him on the lips and excitedly tells him that they should have enough of them now to get started. Her lips taste of rotten potato. Back in the construction site, they get to work. Taking it in turns, they raise the sledgehammer above their heads and bring it down on the homeless man's body. With every hit, they expect the magic to stop working, but it doesn't. Dollops of salsa pool where bruises would normally form. While one of them pummels the corpse, the other scoops the salsa into jars, carefully screwing on the lid and writing little labels to go alongside. Artisanal pico de gallo, £3.50. Salsa made straight from the heart. "It's not all made from a heart though, is it?" the thief says. "Only one jar will be. The rest will be made from the bowels and stuff. It's all connected, innit? You can taste some in a bit and tell me if any of it's different." He doesn't really fancy trying bowel salsa, but his wife makes him. She's the one holding the hammer. You know what? If he didn't know it was bowel salsa, he never would have guessed it. Tastes pretty much the same as all the rest. The pair of them managed to mash about half of the body into salsa that day. The remaining carcass lies on the concrete rather neatly. There's no blood or gore at all. If anything, this is a pretty sterile affair. Just salsa. "What we calling our business then?" the thief asks. "How about Joe's?" His wife rolls her eyes at him and thinks for a moment. "El martillo y la pulpa." The thief doesn't know any Spanish, so he just laughs and pretends he gets the joke. At least, he hopes it was a joke. 2 days later, business is booming. From the first thing in the morning until late in the afternoon, the jars of salsa are selling like hotcakes. The two of them can hardly believe it. At lunchtime each day, the thief has to go back to the apartment and restock. Those are their code words for going back to the dilapidated apartment complex and pulverizing the corpse of a homeless man with a sledgehammer, just in case that wasn't clear. At £3.50 per jar, their handmade recipe is pulling in the big bucks. Who'd have guessed that the homeless could be so profitable? The market they're selling in apparently has a strong Mexican migrant community living nearby. On top of that, a handful of local moms started sharing photos of the artisan salsa from the local market, which surged the demand. It might even be time to start jacking up the prices. Only, they've got a problem. As the thief arrives at the market with a wheelbarrow full of freshly filled jars, he pulls his wife to one side to have a whispered conversation with her. They're almost out of stock. And of course, by the word stock, they really mean the cold, rotting dead body. His wife looks at him incredulously. Does he really not see the solution here? If you're running low on ingredients and your product is flying off the shelves, what do? You go out and source yourself some more damn ingredients. As the thief walks away with his wheelbarrow and sledgehammer, he wonders why it's always him doing the messy jobs. But try as he might, the thief can't find any targets. He walks around all of the streets near the block of flats, but has no luck. He approaches one sleeping homeless man and kicks him in the shoulder, trying to wake him. Bad idea. The man starts yelling loud enough to attract the attention of everyone on the street. No amount of begging or bargaining is going to get this man to move an inch. The thief gives it a go anyway and watches in shock as the man buries his teeth into his ankle. Limping back up the stairs into their nook in the construction site, the thief has a scowl on his face. After a couple of hours, his wife arrives and joins him at the fire. It's a good profit today, even better than the previous day. Keep this up, and they'll be rich in no time. He grins at his wife. She leers back, then shoves the money back into her pocket. Hang on a minute. That wasn't part of the deal. They're partners, 50-50. She bares her teeth at him and tells him she's just holding on to it for now. The sledgehammer sits halfway between them. The thief glances down at it. So does his wife. But that night, they are in luck. A drunk wanders into the construction site. He's so wasted that he doesn't have time to figure out that he's been pummeled to death by a hammer until he's just a generous splodge of salsa fresca slowly oozing across the concrete floor. The following night, another 2 men saunter in. Then the thief convinces an obnoxious local with a dog to follow him into the place the afternoon after that. The dog wasn't worth the effort. It ran around a lot before they caught it and only produced enough salsa for a medium-sized garden party. But the haul is good. All of a sudden, they are overrun with work. Jar after jar after jar. Everyone in the area keeps coming back for more, even telling their friends about it. This salsa is to die for. They have to know the recipe. Dead Londoners, drunks, dogs, that kind of thing. The crowd of moms aren't quite sure what the joke was, but try to laugh anyway. Everything is going perfectly. Except, of course, for the thief's ankle. The bite mark went purple, and now it's on its way to green. The veins on his foot and up his leg are starting to look like a funny color. He should really go to the hospital, but he reckons it'll be okay. Besides, they don't really like him at any of the hospitals around here. He's had one too many visits, and been the reason for one too many for several other men. But that night, it's clear that something's wrong. As he and his wife sit on the pile of corpses next to their fire, he feels a cold sweat on his brow. His wife counts all of the coins into neat piles. There's more in front of them than they've ever shared before, but his head is feeling swimmy. The thief lies down on the corpse bed. He's back to back with an investment banker who took the wrong alley home on his walk home from work. "No lying down yet. You need to cook up a new batch before bed." His wife is glaring at him. He refuses, says he's too tired tonight and his ankle hurts. She starts grumbling at him about not pulling his weight. A switch flips in his head. "I'll do more work when you give me what I'm owed. The money. I want my share now." His wife cackles and jumps to her feet. Fat chance. He's not seeing a penny until he actually starts to contribute. She's the one who came up with the idea. She's the one who sells dozens of jars a day. She's the one holding the sledgehammer right now. His eyes widen. "What are you doing with that? You say your ankle's sick? Well, I know something that could help you with that." Before his woozy mind can register what's happening, the sledgehammer arcs through the air towards him. That sobers him up. Lucky for him, he manages to roll out of the way at the last moment, causing the sledgehammer to embed himself in the ground next to him. That's it. It's time for a hostile divorce. He hauls himself to his feet and grasps the hammer, pulling it as hard as he can towards himself. The metal connects with his chest, and he feels the salsa running down his ribs. He shoves her back. The sledgehammer catches her shoulder and salsarizes it. Tomato chunks fly across the room and sizzle in the fire. Back and forth, the hammer swings, hitting the thief, then his wife, then him again. On and on, until nothing is left but a sledgehammer and 2 large piles of salsa. Usually it's the smell that alerts people to a dead body, except for once, it was actually a pretty pleasant smell. Forensic police had to consciously stop themselves from having a taste. One of them even happened to have some tortillas in the car that day. By the time he returned to the station that evening, the packet was empty. He swears to this day that he ate them dry. It wasn't long before the story broke. Some in the local press theorized that this was a bizarre viral marketing campaign from Doritos. Once that theory was out there, it wasn't long before the story died. No one likes overly aggressive advertising. To this day, Scotland Yard hasn't got a clue what was going on at that crime scene. One senior investigating officer was unofficially quoted shaking his head and saying, "I don't know what the hell happened here. Sometimes it's best to just not ask questions." We all know it takes 2 to tango, but I bet you didn't know it takes a sledgehammer to salsa. That was my attempt to draw some kind of lesson from SCP-3794. You can probably guess the nickname of this SCP already. The Salsa Sledgehammer. Currently stored in a standard item locker, this SCP is considered to be totally safe in the right hands. You could use it to demolish walls, break apart cinder blocks, or win over your new mother-in-law with a fresh bowl of homemade nachos. Assuming, of course, that you have the necessary ingredients. That is because when SCP-3794 makes sufficiently heavy contact with living tissue, it immediately converts the point of impact and surrounding area into salsa. Affecting roughly 3 to 8 centimeters around the impact points, this salsa does not adhere to the rest of the body and will immediately slide out of its crater and fall to the ground. Peering at the hole left behind, you will see that the nerve endings, capillaries, and even main arteries will all be instantaneously sealed off. This sledgehammer would make for a very clean murder weapon, if it wasn't for the human-sized amount of salsa you get everywhere in the process. You would need to ensure you smashed up every part of the body, though, as any disconnected limbs or tissues still function and follow orders from the brain as if nothing is wrong. as our thief learned only too well. The salsa itself is good. Nothing incredible, but not that bad either. It just goes to show that if you stick an artisan label on anything, then people go crazy for it. Testing on this sledgehammer has been suspended. A test subject was chosen to lie with his head over a generously sized serving bowl. Researchers swung the hammer and demolished half of the test subject's skull and brain in just one hit. Much to their surprise, however, the subject continued to exhibit all signs of consciousness, moving frantically around the room and even writing the word "helped" in the spilled salsa. The subject died 30 minutes later, the moment that researchers taste tested the dip. Since then, the sledgehammer has remained in its locker, although there is often now an air of suspicion whenever a jar of salsa shows up in the fridge in the break room.
A wasp stings a cockroach in the brain, rendering it a mindless zombie that she can lead to her home and fill with eggs that will hatch and devour the insect from the inside. A snail accidentally eats the eggs of a flatworm, and the eggs hatch, filling the snail's eye stalks with sacs of wriggling larvae. They mimic the movements of caterpillars, attracting hapless birds and enticing them to swoop down, attack, eat, and continue the life cycle of the worms. The spores of the cordyceps fungus make their way inside of a doomed ant, taking over its nervous system, puppeteering its body, and forcing it to march to the nearest highest point, only to die and split open, fungus blooming from its corpse and spreading spores to the next victim. Underwater, the sea louse settles into its new home inside of a fish's mouth, feeding on blood from the tongue until it withers away. There, the louse attaches itself in the tongue's place, serving as a mimic of the original organ, while the fish is none the wiser. Back on land, humans are not exempt. Nematode worm larvae infect the bloodstream through fly bites, hiding undetected until their host feels them wriggling beneath the cornea. Guinea worms enter the system when a person drinks infested water, growing longer and longer, then forcing their way out through the foot. Nature is full of terrifying parasitic creatures, but far scarier than the parasites we know about are the parasites that we haven't discovered yet. The creatures sneaking in and burrowing under the skin of their hosts without anyone even knowing they exist. After all, if you don't know something is there, how can you possibly hope to protect yourself from it? As a man hikes through the woods of the Pacific Northwest, he's thinking about repelling mosquitoes and pulling up his socks to stop ticks from latching onto his flesh. But he has no idea what else is lurking out here in the wild with him. He knows to look out for mountain lions and bears, to watch for signs of rabid animals, and avoid being bitten or scratched. But he doesn't notice the tiny, almost invisible flecks drifting through the air around him. He doesn't notice when one happens to get caught on the breeze of his inhale, pulled into his nostril. He rubs at his nose idly, sniffing to clear his airways, then turns his attention to a bird nesting in a nearby tree. All the while, something is taking root right under his nose. Well, actually, inside of it. But he doesn't feel a thing other than the occasional urge to sneeze. He does, sneezing loud enough to startle the bird he was observing moments ago, but it doesn't do any good. Sneezes are for clearing out dust and debris, foreign objects that wind up in the nose by happenstance. This new intruder is there by design, and it is holding on tight. The hiker continues the rest of his walk without a care in the world, taking deep breaths of fresh forest air and relishing the feeling of the breeze on his face. By the time he gets back home, he's made it out of the woods without a single mosquito bite, with nary a tick to be found in his meticulous pre-shower check. That night, he sleeps soundly, and the next morning as he goes back to work at his office job, all thoughts of the wilderness slowly drift from his mind. He goes about his ordinary routine for months, all the while carrying a hidden passenger with him from place to place, a tiny little thing steadily growing larger and larger, spreading spindly appendages out and up, through the nasal passages, up toward the skull. One night, about 6 months after that fateful hike, the man is sleeping peacefully in his bed, dreaming of a sunlit forest clearing and the pleasant chirping of birds, when all of a sudden, he's jerked awake by a splitting pain in his head. His vision swims from the throbbing pain, and he clutches his face, pressing against his forehead. It must be a migraine, he thinks. He hasn't had one in quite some time, but this is clearly no ordinary headache. Eventually, the pain subsides, and he's able to drift back to sleep. But the next day, at the office, it returns. That same sharp pain radiating through his skull, like the worst sinus headache he has ever had. The persistent feeling of pain and pressure in his head becomes too much to bear, and he decides to take the rest of the day off of work and go to the doctor. Much to the man's relief, his doctor is not concerned. With no other troubling symptoms presenting themselves, the situation seems relatively straightforward. She writes a prescription for some migraine medication, then sends the man on his way. That night, when the headache returns, the man takes some of the medicine, and the cloud of pain clears. Sweet relief. Once again, things are good. For a couple months at least. But then, one day, on his morning walk to the office, just as he's lifting his travel mug of coffee to his lips, his vision cuts out. It's as if something is blocking his eyes, as if someone were covering them and preventing him from seeing directly ahead. But when he lifts his hand to feel his face, there's nothing there. Panicking at the sudden loss of sight, he drops his cup, spilling coffee all over the sidewalk. He doesn't even notice the spill, too busy grasping at his face and feeling his eyes with his fingers. He fumbles in his pocket for his phone, hoping he can remember where the numbers on the screen are well enough to call 911. But his hands are shaking so hard that he drops the phone, hearing it clatter on the pavement. He exclaims in frustration and fear and turns around following the sound of the phone. And as he turns, his vision suddenly clears, the blinders lifted, and he's able to see just as well as he did before. Experimentally, he turns back to face his original direction, and again he loses his sight, something blocking his view. He turns around, and he can see again. He tries this a few more times, spinning back and forth, watching his vision flicker in and out. He only stops when a passing jogger shouts at him, asking what the hell he's doing. The interruption startles him, bringing him back to Earth. What is happening? Surely this can't be normal. What is it about facing one direction that causes him to lose his sight, while another direction returns him to normal? A sinking feeling in his stomach tells him that whatever was causing his headaches before, it was not something he should ignore any longer. He grabs his phone off the ground, calls out of work, and schedules an urgent appointment with his doctor. At first, he considers running home and getting his car or his bicycle, but his unreliable vision would make taking either mode of transportation a potentially deadly mistake. So instead, he walks. The walk to the doctor's office is the most difficult walk of the man's life. Every time he turns a corner, he wonders if his vision will flicker out again, if the mysterious obstacle will block his sight and force him to reroute himself or start from scratch. While trying to maintain a consistent line of sight, he loses his balance several times and nearly collides with the lamppost. Eventually, he reaches the doctor's office. One look at the man's terrified face is enough for the doctor to insist on some immediate x-rays of his head. The man sits on the examination table, nervously bouncing his knee, waiting for the doctor to return with the results. What could it be? Some undiagnosed degenerative illness? A tumor? Irreparable damage caused by looking at a solar eclipse as a child? The man can hear the doctor speaking to a nurse in hushed, frightened tones just outside of the exam room door. He can't quite tell what she is saying, but he makes out one word that makes his blood run cold. Infestation. When the door opens and the doctor enters holding the man's chart, her expression is neutral and professional, but her face is pale, her forehead dotted with sweat. She can't hide the fact that whatever she saw on that x-ray, it horrified her. "What is it?" he asks, though he isn't sure he wants to hear the answer. The doctor is silent for a moment, turning over the right words to say in her mind. After a seemingly endless pause, she pulls an x-ray from the stack of papers on her clipboard and pins it up for them both to see. There the man can see his skull, a white outline against the dark background, his skeleton on display. But inside of the skull, there's a mass that definitely shouldn't be there. It starts in his nose, a rounded shape, but it stretches out in long limbs that travel up into his brain. After a long pause, the doctor speaks. "I've never seen anything quite like this before. At first, I thought it might be some sort of growth, but as I reviewed the scans, I realized that it showed signs of movement. Whatever's in there, I'm afraid that it's alive." The man's stomach turns, and he worries for a moment that he might be sick all over the clean white floor. Instead, he just asks the doctor what can be done to help him. She explains that she plans to give him a local anesthetic, then attempt to get a closer look at the situation. Once she has eyes on the parasite, she will see if she can surgically remove it without causing any additional damage to his brain tissue. All the man can think about is that thing inside of his skull and how badly he wants it gone by any means necessary. He immediately agrees, and after a few quick injections, he's lying on his back, staring up at the ceiling as the doctor performs a nasal endoscopy. She slides the tube up his nostril a little bit at a time, monitoring the image on a nearby screen. Suddenly, she freezes, a small gasp escaping her lips. He demands to know what she's seeing, and she stammers, saying only that it's a creature she's never seen before, but it looks quite a bit like a sea spider. The man's eyes widen, and he's about to say something else, and suddenly his vision goes dark again. Now he knows what that means, and the doctor's startled cry confirms it. The creature is moving. The man begins shaking, begging the doctor to get it out of him, to just grab the invader with some tweezers or whatever it is doctors do in this situation and get it out of his head. She grabs a pair of nasal forceps and slowly eases them into his nose, but the creature feels her coming and lurches upward away from her grasp. The man feels a sudden burst of pain, and then everything goes dark as he loses consciousness, his eyes fluttering shut. The doctor checks his pulse, checks his breathing, and attempts to rouse her patient, but he's out cold. As she examines him, she notices a fluttering motion beneath his right eyelid. At first, she thinks she imagines it and takes a closer look. The flutter turns into a distinct, undeniable bulge beneath the eyelid, and then a slender limb pokes out from beneath the thin veil of flesh. It curves under the eyelid, tugging it open to reveal the unfocused eyeball beneath, and something else. Something moving, pushing the eyeball aside just slightly without knocking it from the socket. The doctor watches in open-mouthed horror as more long, thin appendages join the first, poking out from behind the eye toward the air. The many-legged creature pulls itself from the ocular cavity and begins scuttling down her patient's face, over his neck, then off the edge of the exam table and onto the floor. As it nears the door, the doctor regains her ability to move and rushes to try and catch the thing. She grabs the jar and the forceps, hoping to capture it without touching it. Even with gloves on, she shudders at the thought of touching the thing. It evades her grasp, darting away from her forceps. It scrabbles back toward the table, and in a moment of primal instinct and revulsion, the doctor brings her foot up and stomps on the little parasite with all of her strength. When she lifts her shoe, all that's left on the ground is a few spindly legs and a small brown stain. She curses herself for acting impulsively and not finding a way to trap the thing and keep it for observation, but that ship has sailed. The only thing she can do now is tend to her patient and monitor his well-being. As she approaches the man on the table, his eyes open, and he gasps, sitting up suddenly and gripping his head. The man awakes with a headache and a foggy feeling in his head, but also with a sense of relief, a feeling that the unwelcome presence that took up residence in his skull for so many months is thankfully gone. He asks the doctor, haltingly, struggling to find his words, if she was able to remove the creature. She tells him simply that it is gone now. The man slowly climbs off of the table, and ignoring the protests from the doctor as she begs him to sit back down and let her examine him, he walks out of the office and heads back home. Over the next several weeks, the man returns to normal life. He feels a little bit different, a little hazier, a little slower to respond. He tires more easily, going to bed earlier and sleeping in later, but overall, he feels nothing but relief. Still, at night, when he tries to fall asleep, he thinks of those X-rays. He imagines what that creature might have looked like when the doctor got it out, how it might have moved. He wonders where it came from, or if it will come back. He never goes hiking in those particular woods again. Meanwhile, the doctor receives an influx of patients complaining of persistent headaches. Sometimes it's a sinus infection, sometimes it's a hormone imbalance, sometimes it's stress. But a few times, well, she knows what to look for now. She tells her patients to watch out for changes in vision, for a feeling of pressure in their skull. She learns how to keep a straight face when looking at their X-rays and seeing that familiar long-limbed shape burrow deep in their nasal cavities. She puts her patients under now when she tries to remove the creatures. It doesn't make much of a difference, but it saves them the terror of the truth, saves them the feeling of the creature thrashing inside their head until it knocks them out. She manages to collect a few specimens for study and contacts her friend at the Centers for Disease Control. He's never seen or heard of anything like these parasites either, but he does know someone who might be able to offer their expertise. When the doctor comes into work the next day, there are two strangers waiting in her office. They introduce themselves as employees of a specialized research foundation and ask to see her samples. The next thing she knows, the doctor is waking up in bed the following morning, and she has no memory of ever seeing a patient with a strange spidery parasite in their skull. If she remembered enough to look for the records, she would find that they had disappeared from her office, along with the living specimens she had collected. But she doesn't remember, and her discovery is now in the hands of the SCP Foundation, who have given it an official designation, SCP-1104. SCP-1104, commonly nicknamed nose crabs, is a species of organism tentatively identified as a member of the order Chelicerata, which includes sea spiders and horseshoe crabs. The life cycle of the organism consists of at least 2 phases. The first of these is a larval stage, at which point the creature is approximately 0.4 millimeters in diameter. At irregular intervals, SCP-1104 larvae are expelled from tubes at a concentration of up to 200 per cubic meter. These larvae drift through the air for as long as 14 hours at a time, and have been spotted traveling for several kilometers under the right weather conditions. Whenever an SCP-1104 larva is inhaled, it will attach to the nasal mucosa of its host and begin to excrete H1 receptor antagonists that suppress inflammation as well as the implantation of any further larvae. Over the next 6 to 8 months, SCP-1104 will grow larger, extending appendages through the ethmoidal canals of the host. Aside from occasional persistent headaches, the host will likely not notice the presence of SCP-1104 during this period. Once the organism has matured, however, it will begin to apply pressure to its host's optic nerves, causing its central visual field to be obstructed. SCP-1104 will apply this pressure selectively whenever the host is not oriented toward the gradient of atmospheric hydrogen sulfide. SCP-1104 can detect this hydrogen sulfide through its host's nasal respiration. At first, this effect is distressing to the host, but after a little while, they will begin to adjust their behavior accordingly, showing a preference for facing and moving in directions that do not cause those visual disturbances. Without realizing it, the host is moving closer and closer to higher concentrations of hydrogen sulfide. Once the host reaches an area with sufficient hydrogen sulfide concentration, SCP-1104 will extend its appendages into the host's prefrontal cortex, causing the host to lose consciousness. While the host is passed out, SCP-1104 will exit through their ocular cavity. Once SCP-1104 has left its host, it will attempt to find and enter the source of the hydrogen sulfide. This can include, but is not limited to, a lava tube or a sewer pipe. Whatever it does next is currently unknown, as its subterranean behavior and development has not been documented. Humans show the same instinctive aversion to SCP-1104's visual disturbances as other animal hosts, but they are also able to defy this influence. They are especially able to avoid following SCP-1104's prompting if they are informed of the nature of the infestation. Any attempt to surgically remove or poison a fully developed SCP-1104 will trigger its exit response, and it will flee through the host's ocular cavity and scuttle away. Following SCP-1104's exit, the former host displays a lack of spontaneous response to external stimulus, with delayed reactions as well as changes to personality linked to orbital frontal lesions. While individual instances of SCP-1104 are relatively easy to destroy, the species as a whole is considered endemic to certain subsurface geological formations. As it currently stands, the general population of SCP-1104 cannot be reached by convenient means of extermination. An area 10 meters in diameter, thought to contain the majority of SCP-1104, has been blocked off from the public under the guise of conservation and designated Site-104. Any non-Foundation personnel mammalian organisms larger than 10 kilograms found in the area should be considered contaminated and promptly incinerated on site. Once the SCP Foundation has discovered a way to effectively exterminate SCP-1104, doing so has been strongly endorsed by the O5 Council. However, such a method has not yet been discovered. So for now, SCP-1104 continues thriving underground, spouting larvae into the air to crawl up the noses of unsuspecting deer, possums, squirrels, and humans. So if you go out walking and feel a little tickle in your nose, it might just be a bit of extra pollen in the air. Or it might be a tiny nose crab, burrowing itself into your mucosal tissue, growing just a little bigger every day until it reaches your brain. But, like I said, maybe it's nothing. No need to get crabby about it. Check out the DrBob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like Botfly Parasite, SCP-658.